The story begins in the Tsurumi Datori family. The protagonist is Asuta Tsurumi, a 17-year-old guy, a student of 11th grade. He says that he helped his father in the institution, but everything changed at the moment they never came. Along with this snack began to erect high-rise buildings, and soon its presence began to interfere with the developers. After that, bad words and numerous slander began to appear in the news about Tsurum. The hero's father did not worry too much about this situation and was not going to give his cafe. However, once the circumstances suddenly changed, the hero learns that his father was knocked down by a pickup at a speed of 80 kilometers per hour and immediately goes to the hospital. Seeing his father's condition, he is genuinely surprised that he is still alive. Asuta runs to his father, confidently stating that the pickup was intentionally trying to knock him down. However, the father assures the son that the truck would not help the attackers. Suddenly, a doctor comes to the office, and the man asks when he can discharge. But the doctor is responsible that this can happen in only a few months. Hearing this, the man is upset, because he does not want to inherit the cafe at all. In addition, the man calls him a fool, and it affects the guy a little. However, the neighbor notes that, knowing his father, he will not even release the kitchen knife in the trolley. In this opinion, the guy agrees, noting that everyone is looking forward to his dishes. Suddenly, the phone rang in the suit, which he forgot to turn off. He had just taken the phone, heard the alarming news from the arena. Their cafe swept the flames. The hero immediately reports to his father, and he is heard. The man reminds the essence of the knife. Warning: in no case can it be exposed to fire. Then Asuta jumps on his bicycle and rushes towards the cafe. On the way, he explains that it is about the knife of Santuk, a family relic that his father appreciates over his own life. Asuta adds that he would never give this jewel to the previous owner of the famous cafe Sasaki. So this valuable knife they have no right to lose. The hero goes to the place where people have already gathered around the burning building. Asuta looks around with horror, realizing that this flame will burn everything around. Suddenly, someone grabs him from behind and sharply turns. The hero recognizes the girl. It was the Rhina who called him. He firmly grabs her by his shoulders, trying to calm. But soon he decides to rush into the fire, and Rhine with despair shouts him after him, convincing that it is not worth the victim. However, soon, Asuta loses consciousness, and when he remembers, he finds himself while lying on the ground. Looking around, he suddenly notices a dream in his hand. The hero begins to return mention of the events that preceded death, and, covered with horror, he is aware of everything that has happened. But suddenly, he is understood that he has already crossed the border of life. He got into the other world. The hero, with an alarming sip of tears, takes a knife with both hands. In memory, the images of the Rhina and father emerge. But he suddenly distracts a strange noise that comes from the depths of the forest. The hero rotates with fear and begins to retreat. Earlier, he had no idea whether he was paradise or hell, but now he does not understand where he got. Asura suggests that there may be a wild animal nearby, and it is encouraged by the desire to escape. Suddenly, a wild boar looks out of the bushes. The hero is confused, thinking it is a common boar. But he did not have time to remember how the beast began to eagerly dig a back leg, preparing for a rapid attack. After that, he rushes to Asura, raising his cry and starting to run. But soon it is overwhelmed, falls, and, when he caresses, takes off directly into the pit. Already in place, he feels acute pain and confusion, not understanding what is happening. Looking at, Asud suddenly realizes that he got into a deep pit trap, from which, at first glance, it is impossible to get out. Then he breaks onto a cry, shouting for help. However, the relentless silence prevails around. From this, hero is covered by fury. He begins to shout that he is no longer able to tolerate it, and a split insult on the one who arranged this trap. Suddenly the female voice called back, noting that he was too noisy. At first he felt a light fright, but soon rejoiced in his luck and was filled with joy. He tells that he fell into this pit, thinking it was an evil joke. But suddenly, the girl confesses that she dug it, and it is amazing it. She then explains that it is a trap for Jaja, and she is wondering whether the hero generally imagines how much he had to spend to build it. From these words, Asut concludes that he is to blame and decides to apologize. The hero confesses that he sincerely regrets that he has destroyed her efforts and appeals to the girl to get out. But looking back, he notes that the pit is not really so deep. and concludes that he may well get out. Without delay, she departs. Asuta finally comes to the fact that the situation is critical, and he asks the girl to stop. He explains that he turned his leg and cannot get out, but in response, the girl cold indicates that she is indifferent. Then the hero begins to ask for help and asks why the girl is so ruthless. Suddenly, she again provokes him to a noise, but in the end, he still decides to lower the rope for him. Asuta immediately took this opportunity, confident that from the very beginning he knew about his salvation. Flawling outwards, he noted that this place is extremely reminiscent of hell, because he did not feel dead at all. Finally, feeling herself in liberty, he descends to the ground and thanks the girl for salvation. However, when Asura opens his eyes, he sees her with a harsh look. The girl aimed at him and demands to tell who he is. The girl is wondering who the hero is, and he notes about herself that it is not too friendly. He notes that he had already apologized for the pit, but she cuts off that he was talking too much, and he hardly demands the answer. The hero suddenly hesitates and decides to ask the girl to explain that it is for a place, because it is not at all like paradise or hell. She then reports that they are in the woods at the foot of Mount Manga. The girl adds that this is the western kingdom of Selva, the possession of the Marquis Janos, and she is interested in where the hero came from. The guy replies that he was born in Japan, in the prefecture of Chiba, and is wondering if the girl knows about such a country. According to her reaction, he realizes that she knows how to know, because they are not in Japan now. At that moment, Asuta himself notices that the girl blows an extremely unusual aroma. It is sweet, like an overgrown fruit, and at the same time barely pervasive, like a flower bud. In this incense, the freshness of the greens and spices of spices, and also the echo of meat and fat are heard. Suddenly the hero notes that he was hungry, and a loud grunt in his stomach is heard in silence. The girl is instantly annoyed and with indignation asks what he conceived. The hero does not understand anything and asks again, but at that moment his stomach grunts again. The girl perceives it as a mockery and decides that she is considered unawares. However, Asuta explains that she does not laugh at it, but simply noticing that she smells delicious. The girl replies that he has no food. At the same time, she realizes that she was left without prey. The hero reminds that he has already apologized for that pit, but it is at this moment that his stomach protests again. Suddenly he realizes that it is the end. He hurries that he does not encroach on the territory of the girl, and immediately decides to get out of here. Asuta realizes that no matter how much he apologizes, a loud hook in his stomach speaks more eloquently, and the girl is already trembling from rage. Having agreed to the situation, he closes his eyes, and preparing to say goodbye to his, seems to be a second life. Suddenly the girl's face changes sharply, and the sword falls out of her hands. It makes the hero ask if she is really bad. For a moment, she says that she is enough words, and wept. However, he soon realizes that he cannot be silent further. But suddenly the girl exhales and begins to laugh. The hero watches her reaction with surprise, not understanding why she held back laughter. But in a moment, she again gives him a sword, and coldly reports that she is still going to kill him. Asuta with anger exclaims, asking why the girl does so cruelly. In response, she cold states that she has never felt such a humiliation, and therefore swear to bring to the end. Then the hero begins to justify that inadvertently caused her a pain of a couple, explaining that his restless stomach is to blame. He suddenly realizes that he must somehow persuade her not to do the massacre. He begs not to kill him, confessing that he does not know where he finds himself and how to deal with in this situation. The girl confesses that she does not understand what he tries to tell her. She notices that he is clearly unlike a resident of a stone city, and is even less reminiscent of a man from the Western Kingdom. Then the hero reminds her that he is from Japan. Then she invites him to go home so that he can tell everything on her heart. In addition, he jokingly promises, if he refuses, he will kill him and bury him somewhere nearby. Asuta is interested in whether she is afraid to call him. However, the girl replies that at night without fire, he will just die in the forest. Then the hero decides to introduce himself and calls himself Tsurumi Asuta. But trying to repeat his name, the girl pronounces him as a Turura Asuta. He once again announces the correct pronunciation, but the girl again twists his name, saying each time. This time, the hero invites him to turn to him by his name and is interested in the name of the girl. She seems to be Ifoi, then turns away from him. In a moment she rotates and asks what he waits, offering her shoulder. He is somewhat confused, but Afi explains that time for them is a too valuable resource, and insists, let him not delay. The hero fulfills her request. But after that the girl envelops embarrassment, and she sharply repels him. Then she, ashamed, asks who allowed him to touch her breast, because she only asked to keep her shoulder. The hero replies that he understood everything. But suddenly the Apra notes that the asbutt under the clothing is hidden the blade, and it is noticeably alarming. He tries to convince the girl, who does not intention to harm her, and asks her to calm down. She does not understand what she should worry about, and states that he can put a blade in her if she wants. However, he adds immediately, in this case, she will instantly cut his throat. Then the girl realizes that all their efforts were in vain, and notes that if the Giba attacks them in such darkness, they will inevitably die. The hero recalls that this is the very beast for whom he arranged a trap, and draws attention to the fact that it is very similar to the boar. The girl asks again, and then he explains, it is a black monster with large fangs. Aifa confirms that it was a Giba and concludes, the hero has already seen him. He agrees with that, remembering that it was because of him that he was trapped. Suddenly he notices that the girl's cloak is extremely similar to Gyaba fur. She explains that this cloak belongs to the charming people who hunt such animals. She then tells that their lives depends on hubab meat, and they sell the canines and horns. According to Atsfe, residents of the stone capital treat them with contempt and call Giba Jeres. The hero is interested in why they have this attitude. The girl notes that Guayav's flesh is quite rigid and has not too pleasant smell. Therefore, she adds, those who eat it often acquire such aroma. In response, the hero suddenly exclaims that she has not heard from a bad smell at all. On the contrary, she smells very nice. In response, Aif decides to keep silent, letting him continue. Asuta notes that his nose perfectly feels aroma, and suggests that this Giba is probably very tasty, because it resembles a boar outwardly, and the boar meat is known for its taste. The girl in response points out that the dish can be neither delicious nor cheese. For the hero, though he and the inexperienced cook, these words seem quite rigid, but at the same time are perceived as a kind of challenge. In the end, they get the right place, and a small settlement opens before the hero. He immediately envelops a pleasant aroma, and he is wondering how many people live here. The girl says that the villages are located from north to south, and in total there are about 500 people. It also adds that in order to go from one edge to the other, you need to spend the half-day. Suddenly, someone turns to her, and this causes a clearly unacceptable reaction in Aifi. The hero is instantly concerned with fear. They are faced with a man who pays attention to the essence and carelessly notices her thinness, asking who stands near her. However, the girl decides not to tell nothing and replies that it does not apply to it, calling it a digasun. In response, the guy asks her the question, is it not because of this Sangha rule these beautiful people? It becomes obvious from his tone. He is not going to retreat. Therefore, the hero approaches the Dug and immediately notices his unusual appearance. He is wondering which nation is a nation of Asut, but the girl again refuses that it does not apply to him. Aifa recalls that nothing is guilty of the boy's family, and adds that all his chatter only burden her. She advised him to disappear from her eyes as soon as possible. The chassis begins to cover the rage, but the girl interrupts it, offering, if something does not suit, let it call it on a duel. Otherwise, it is best to avoid meeting her, because his presence is unpleasant. After that, the Aifa turned sharply and moved away, so unexpectedly that the guy jumped. He began to shout her after, insulting and shouting the preschool words. In addition, he warned her to be careful and threatened that she could break her head from behind her back, confusing her with a Giba. The boys come out of the DIH. The hero involuntarily notes that maintaining a good relationship with neighbors is really worth it. However, he later confidently recognizes that he is not judged by him. The girl said that that night when her father died, this husband made his way to her and tried to take advantage of her defenselessness. After that, Elisa beat him so much that he could not get up on his feet, and later thrown into the river. But now, because she has been the heir of the song kind, she will no longer find a place in the village. She calls Sun a worthy rival, and the hero, repented, tries to pick up her words back, recognizing that it was really beaten. However, A and FA only notes that it does not make any sense now. Moreover, after this case, the Sulian could completely expel them from the settlement. The hero agrees with her, but suddenly in the silence the loud grunts of his stomach. The girl begins to lose patience and asks if he did it intentionally and whether he really wanted to swim. After a while, they come to a small house, and the IPA invites Asuta to go inside. When the guy crosses the threshold, he is surprised by the unexpected detail. Here you need to shoot shoes. At first the girl decided to cook food, because she was already tired of listening to the grunt of the hero in her stomach. He thanked her for it. Asuta begins to look around and asks whether one of her family is at home. However, she reminds that her father has already died, as she said earlier, and her mother left even earlier. After that, the girl again points out that the guy creates a noise and tells him to sit quietly. The hero immediately decides to agree to it. Afterwards, she removes her cloak. Asuta suddenly notices that the smell has become even more intense, and at this point the girl returns to him sharply. He immediately picks up and asks what happened. The Afa asks him to tell him that he hides under his clothes, explaining that the forest is so introduced when someone comes to a foreign home. The hero slowly gets the knife and asks if it is really necessary, but the girl replies without hesitation. It should happen, because he spent the night here. And suddenly the thought is illuminated. He may have been in this place through the knife of Santuk. Then Asura decides to pass the girl a knife by informing that this thing is of particular value to him. He asks her to be careful with him, and in response, the girl notes that he never treats things lightly. Suddenly, she guesses that this sword was presented to him by his parents, and the guy confirms her assumption. After that, the Ifa silences, moves sideways, and notes that there are no those who despise their own family among people. For a while the girl comes out, holding a pot in her hands, and it is at this moment that the hero is sharply raised. He is noticeably surprised by the unusual dishes for him, and the girl immediately notices. Ifa reports that it is not ready, but the hero explains. He is interested in a culinary culture, because it is to some extent his profession. Gazing at the contents, he suddenly exclaims. The hero impresses the amount of food. In his opinion, this is too much for two. However, the girl does not understand his surprise, and only says that she is unclear what he is talking about. It then removes a piece of meat that is cooked in boiling water from the pan. Suddenly, Asuta notes that the meat is sprinkled with spices, and he guesses it is probably a giba. Despite a rather harsh look, the dish at the same time has a rather appetizing appearance. The girl suddenly notices the expression of his face and rotates, trying to understand why he smiles. It distracts Asuta, and it replies that the dish just looks appetizing. She, clasping her teeth, reminds that the food is neither delicious nor careless. After that, he returns to the cauldron again, and the hero, feeling inconvenience, looks away. Suddenly, the APHA is raised and reports that time is enough, at least as long as the meat is being prepared. Then she appeals to the hero to tell herself. Then Asuta removes her head and tells the girl where and how he had passed 17 years before he was here. In addition, he confesses that he had already considered himself dead, but woke up here as if nothing had happened. At that moment, he decided that he was in an unfamiliar country, on his own planet. Then the hero notices another wonder. Despite the fact that he does not speak any language except Japanese, he communicates without interruption with Yofi. At the same time, the girl has never heard of Japan. In response, the girl decides to keep silent. Then Asura asks at least to hint where he is. After a short pause, she reports that the village of Prilicia and the stone capital of the genome are on the lands of the western kingdom of Selva. She also claims that in the city of the Western Throne, there is as many people as stars in the sky. He further says that the inhabitants of Selva honor the western deity named Selva, and there are 4 kingdoms on the Amasol mainland, each of whom has his own god. In Amasol, every kingdom has its own deity, who is honored. There are no people who would not be taken care of by one of the 4 great gods. Without the gods, there are only animals here. An unexpected girl asks, except Asur does not know about it. He replies that, unfortunately, this is true. It assumes that it may be an unknown breed or an animal that is not mentioned in Japanese directories, although it recognizes that it is unlikely. However, Asuta has already made his own conclusions. The hero is aware that he was in the world, not at all like the one in which he lived earlier. Suddenly, he addresses Ifa to the question of whether someone else happened to die and then find himself in this world. But in response, Elisa claims that she is not known about such. However, Asuta concludes that he was brought here from a completely different world, as if he had fallen from heaven. And, for some strange reason, the local people also understand Japanese. The hero suddenly realizes he was no longer destined to see either father or Ren. He will not give them a knife. It is no longer possible to return to your world. With the last hope, he convinces himself that he probably just hit his head in dreams. After all, there is only one left here. Awareness of this fact gives him a true horror. But suddenly it is distracted by the girl. She states that she understood everything, and in a moment, she notices that the meat has just been prepared. She lifts the lid, and the hero notices a lot of scales inside. He asks the girl if she heard what she wanted. She replies to this, which is clear. A hero or a stranger from another world, or just a crazy one who sincerely believes. Asuta decided that if she understood it, she probably believed to him, because her gaze was surprisingly serious at that moment. Then she noted that the hero undoubtedly does not deceive, and therefore he is just crazy. After these words, he calms down a little and decides to thank, watching what is happening in a frying pan. The girl thinks in surprise, why did the hero rejoice because she called him crazy? But he assures that this is not true. Asura confesses that he was pleased that she dared to believe the words of a strange stranger she met for the first time in her life. Even if she considered him crazy, then AIFA he is interested in what he will do next. The hero replies that now he has nowhere to go, and he has not yet thought about the future. After that, she asks if there is a way to return to his world. However, he reminds that he does not even remember how he got here, not to mention how to return to his world. Suddenly his thoughts were cut off by an annoyed grimace, I-fis. Sue, that turns to her, and asks to say immediately if he interferes with someone, promising to leave immediately. But the girl understands. He has no idea how to survive the night in the forest. And if he is presented there, he will certainly catch either a giba or a munto. Afa sums up that it was enough to see them together, and the hero does not even know about the existence of 4 great gods. If Asuta breaks one of the prohibitions, the responsibility for it will lie down. She told him to stay side by side until she was able to at least a little bit of his common sense and rules of the forest people. After that, she added, he can go anywhere, even for a sure death. The hero replies that he understood everything, and sincerely thanks the girl, reverence for himself. However, she suddenly exclaims with dissatisfaction why he bows here. At this point, Asuta recalls how the Ifa suggested that he stay. He feels joy that she became the first person he met in this world. Meanwhile, the girl reports that the meat is definitely ready. She teaches food on a separate plate for the hero and asks him to eat. He sincerely thanks, noting that the dish smells delicious. But it does not give him the idea that she did not remove the foam during cooking. The girl notices that he thought, and with a note the amount specifies whether he will eat. Then he tastes the dish and tries to guess what she cooked with meat, with onions or potatoes. Somehow, Sweet felt the taste of the dish and immediately stated that it was an abomination. Her cry shakes the whole house. After that, it comes to sleep. It is at this moment that the hero plunges into the memories of the past. He recalls how he was called to score for the first time. Then he felt easy fear, but still decided to try. After a while, Asuta reports with a sigh of relief that everything is ready, and his father in response notes that they have already completed the preparation of stew from a wild boar. Asura wondered if this dish was really cooked from what he cut. He was only answered with a smile that he was naive, because the meat should be kept for a few days. After this short conversation, everyone began to taste the dish. The hero exclaims that the dish is incredibly tasty and does not smell rot at all. The father, picking up this opinion, notes that the dish is not fat at all and is very easy to eat. Suddenly, Ryan is wondering if they will eat the meat that the hero has just got. In response, he promises to prepare her a dish from Helen. Then the girl confesses that she is sorry for the deer. However, in response, she hears a counter question. Does she regret the boar? The hero remembers the aroma of the pork soup that he tasted during the hike, at the moment when the Afa tries to bring him to his senses. He notices that he becomes more louder around and suddenly feels a blow. The girl explained that even if she allowed him to stay, it does not mean that he will be able to eat for free, and Asuta agreed with her words. For breakfast, she gave him the dried meat of the giba, warning that as soon as he eats, they would immediately leave the house. However, having tasted the meat, the hero understands immediately. He is not cheered at all. In addition, the blood from it is not even lowered. so he calls such a dish disgusting. But suddenly, he notices an annoyed, gloomy face nearby, and it makes him rush to eat everything left on the plate. Unexpectedly, the hero returns and sees a cauldron. At that moment, he recalls that yesterday's dinner was something special. That meat had a sharp smell of the game. It was rigid and sticky from fat. The girl cut the onion, but she remained superfluous. Her presence in no way affected the taste. The potatoes, however, boiled so much that it just crumbled in her hands like dust. Only black pepper was from seasoning. The hero mentally called it torture, although the dish smelled surprisingly appetizing. While he was trying to swallow the cooked, the girl decided that he was still hungry and suggested adding more. But suddenly the exclamation of A550, which calls for chewing faster, breaks the guy out of thought and makes him hurry. Further, the girl reminds that even before the sun rises high into the sky, it is necessary to collect the leaves of the crowd and Pico. He replies that he understood everything, after which he was interested in Santoku with a knife. At this point, Ifa also remembers that weapon and orders him to go to the warehouse and pick it up. The hero obediently goes there, and entering the room, immediately feels the rich aroma of spices. He instantly finds a knife, and nearby notices leaves that resemble spicy seasonings. The hero looks down on his sides, and suddenly hears how someone sounds near. This girl turns to. The Afa sounded angrily, calling for a hurry, because they had already lost a lot of time. She reminded again that she could not be delayed, and suddenly noticed no one listened to her. The girl notices that he looks carefully at the products, and asks why he is considering stocks on the shelf, because he still is not going to eat them. The guy replies that he is the son of a cook. Suddenly he realizes that she wants to tell her something, although this girl does not pay attention to the taste of food. However, the hero still decides to share his words. He decides to ask her to allow him to prepare her grateful dinner for shelter, but he first receives only silence. However, the girl again, with dissatisfaction, poses this question. She concludes that the hero probably wants to thank her for even a child. After that, the girl calls him a fool and asks no longer to invent such things. Asuta tries to deny her words, explaining that the cooking with which he is familiar is significantly different from the local. However, the Afa insists, for her food is only a means of survival. The hero does not agree with this. He notes that it is not only a medicine, and invites her to evaluate his culinary skills, assuring that she may be a little better. The girl eventually decides to put up and allows to act at her own discretion. The hero gets permission to cook. The girl immediately notices that his words sound too pretentious, and strictly warns, if it is only a children's trick, he will regret. The hero rushes to her with excitement, seeking to find out what she means, but Afa is restrained with him to do business. Wandering the forest, the hero suddenly felt the heat and cast his gaze on one of the plants, but the girl immediately noticed that they did not need it, because Pico leaves only on the river. He agreed with her, involuntarily surprised as she noticed that he had stopped. Asuta concludes that the peak leaves are a raw material for the preparation of black pepper, because he saw them dried in the pantry. The Afa agrees with him and explains that they are rubbed with meat. It adds that the meat does not deteriorate, but this effect lasts only a month. The hero approaches another plant and asks if these fruits are useful for something. But suddenly the girl sharply asks him to pick up her hands. Asut fades instantly, and she explains that it is strictly forbidden to take gifts from Mogi Mog. The girl explains that they are allowed to collect only inedible grass, because Mount Molga and the surrounding forest belong to the western kingdom of Selva. She further says that these cute people initially lived in the southern kingdom of Jigal, where they had to run away. They were allowed to settle here provided that they would hunt for jive, so gradually this people turned into those who feed on the gib. But the hero is aware that Hiba is perceived as a pest. Suddenly, Ifa calmly reports that in the event of a violation of the ban, it is waiting for scalp, and it scares the hero. After that, they go on the road again. The boys approach the shore, and the hero immediately notices that there are no plants at all. Suddenly, the girl goes forward and reports, "Before looking for the leaves of Pico, you must first swim." The hero fades in numbness, deciding for himself that he had not to come here. However, suddenly, Aya turns to him and asks to hold her things, explaining that all is contaminated with fat. The girl begins to take off her clothes while he is embarrassed, asks her to stop. He is surprised that even here everything has acquired a ambiguous, obscene. And suddenly the girl, as if just in case, notes that you cannot look at an unmarried woman without clothes. Hearing this, the hero is in a hurry to close his eyes. But suddenly he realizes that he may seem to look at a married woman, and his eyes are involuntarily rounded. From these words, the girl is noticeably dissatisfied, but calmly asks him to stand on guard while she was washed so that no one will crack down and look in her direction. The hero had no other way out of the way to sit and wait. The girl strictly warned him not to look, and her things were so difficult that he could even move his feet. Then he looks at the rock and understands how much she worries him. After all, the fate disappeared. Asura thought imagines that if he sees her without clothes, he will be promised paradise on earth. Suddenly she notices something. Suddenly, a cry of a girl who immediately distracts the hero. He jumped on his feet, looked out of the rock, and wondered what happened, insisting that she would respond. Without waiting for the answer, he realizes that something was wrong, and decides to go to her. The hero notes that she will be forced to look at the girl, though she asked him not to do it. Looking at the river, he does not immediately notice the Ande, and, covered with horror, concludes that it has already been taken by the current. At that moment, he decides to rush to rescue. But suddenly the girl emerges from the water and warns him not to approach closer. At the same moment, a large snake emerges from the water, which grabs it. The hero covers the horror of what he saw, and he notices that the beast wrapped his left hand with his body. Asura is injured, but at this moment he decides to take a chance. The hero informs the girl that he will pull it out of the water with a snake, and asks to prepare for the push. It allows the snake to wrap his hand even more tightly, and then sharply swings and forcefully strikes her on the monster and the girl on the rock, forcing the enemy to release her. The hero had already begun to rejoice with the fact that the snake was responsible, and rushed to Afi. He decided to pull her sideways, beware that her bones could have been broken. Then he pushed the snake, and her powerless body fell into the water. Suddenly, Asura noticed that the girl came to her senses, so she wondered if she could breathe. The girl in response assured that only a little bit of water. At that moment, the hero does not look from her breast, though he realizes that he can pay for life. Suddenly, the girl sharply repels him, grabs his knife, and Asuta turns to her with hurry, assuring that he has seen nothing or even looked. However, at the same moment, he gets struck several times and falls to the ground. When he opens his eyes, darkness is already dominating, and he hears the voice of Isekai'D. She understands that he is alive and hastily orders him to flee. Then the hero is selected from the body of the Giba and realizes what happened. The girl explains to him that the beast is pulled from behind and warns he must constantly be alert. Asuta accepts a serious look and agrees with the girl, although he is not at all liked that she teaches him while completely emphasizing. However, the girl again asks him to tear his eyes, warning that somehow his eyes can scratch for it. However, since he saved her that day, she decides not to resort to her intentions. In response, Asuta also decides to thank her for salvation. When the Afa dresses, the hero tells her that she now has a new fresh-sewed suit. In response, the girl offers it immediately, but he notes that the blood should first be released. Aifa. She looked at the hero in surprise, and then he finally realized what was the matter. He explained that the unpleasant smell of meat is the smell of blood, which should be drained. But the girl objected. The blood would surely leak out of meat. But in the end, she states that only the hind legs will be carried, and she is about to take them out. The hero immediately stops her and asks to allow him to do so. First, the girl falls asleep in silence, but eventually agrees. Asuta is aware that it is a difficult task. It is not easy to lower blood. To do this, you need to spread the aorta or carotid artery, while the last strokes are still stored in the heart. In addition, it is not a pig, but a creature with an unknown body structure that the hero still has to unravel. Returning to the sword, the hero appeals to him to help achieve the goal, and suddenly, the monster begins to flow abundantly from the body. The hero is surprised to realize that he managed to strike and exclaims it. The girl no longer understands why he does so because they only need hind legs, horns, and fangs. But Asura calls everything else a waste. He decides to make sure that her meat becomes even more delicious. Not only the hips, but other parts. But the hero notices that the animal is already dead, which means that you can start turning. He is carefully taken to work, trying not to damage any of the internal organs. In the end, Asuta completes the work and tells the girl that he would like to pick up the whole body of Giba home, waiting for her consent. but suddenly, he asks her to wait a little more to build a special design. Subsequently, seeing the act of the hero, the girl exclaims in the light that they will pull it together. However, this prospect of the hero does not pleases. Breathing from effort, Asuta notes that they now open up new opportunities. Because they now have skin, the girl is wondering what they can do. He gives an example of her cape. Then she calls him a fool and adds that skin treatment is women's work, and fur, moreover, can be bought for the fangs. The hero begins to suspect that women are involved in hunting gibu, but ANFA again calls him a fool, explaining that there are no such women. Asuta is covered by reflections while he watches the girl. Meanwhile, she tells that, first and foremost, he is the head of the FA family, and the hunting skills took over from her father. Suddenly, the Fate drew attention to the fact that the hero has long grabbed his mouth and advised him to rest him if he was bad. Unexpectedly, he exclaimed that he was not as strong a monster as her. Therefore, he asks not to make him remember the image, so dear to his heart, and proposes to move on. However, the girl insists. Now she wants to know what the image is. Subsequently, the guy, exhausted to the edge, descends to the ground. He recalls that he also had to go on pico leaves. Suddenly, the girl with condemnation notices that he is even weaker than a woman. Hearing this, the AST first covers numbness, and then it breaks out laughter. He explains that he kept the strength for a big business that is still ahead. However, she confesses that she does not understand his words. Suddenly, the hero rises to his feet, forcing her to be alert, and announces that it is time to deal with this nonsense. The hero reports that the board, the giba, the knives and everything is needed on the spot. After that, she adds that they will now remove the skin from the giba and dismember the carcass. However, suddenly she notices that the girl is not interested in it. She remains indifferent to everything that is happening. Then Asura invites her to look, because it will be interesting now, but she does not answer him and falls asleep. Subsequently, the hero demonstrates to her how he removed the skin and explains that it should be trimmed so that it does not leave fat. To do this, it first cuts the hole in the trunk, then gently pulls the skin and makes a new incision, repeating these actions again. But suddenly, Asuta noticed that she was dorming again and begins to call her, trying to wake up. On this, the girl states that she does not sleep and immediately rushes to the hero. After the experience, the hero is aware that anyone would be tired in his place. He decides to first clean the knife from the fat that is stuck during the battle, and then to take the meat. But suddenly he comes to him that he himself wants to sleep crazy. This awareness even looked at him. Now you need to finish the meat processing immediately, otherwise the valuable product will deteriorate. However, contrary to fatigue, Asuta decides to make every effort for the sake of a delicious dinner. Initially, he embarks on the inside of the hip joint and carefully turns it out. This is a difficult thing, but soon the bone is exposed. Now it is only necessary to carefully cut the veins and tendons. The forces of the hero are already on the verge, and drowsiness is increasingly overcoming it. In addition, the girl behaves too boldly, and it encourages Asuta to fully immerse himself in cooking, rejecting all other thoughts. In the end, it falls on the ground. He states that he is over. Suddenly, the Appa begins to push him with his foot, trying not to let him fall asleep. The hero assures that he is not asleep, although the girl is not sure about it. Then Asuta decides to just laugh at everything. Then FA quickly adds a seasoning of crushed pico. The meat is about to deteriorate. The hero remembers how they recently collecting these leaves, and the girl in response notes that now is not time to sleep. It gets vegetables, and there are 4 poyones and 6 arias before the Asuta. However, before you start cooking, the hero wants to see one thing. He asks whether to eat all the vegetables she brought. Then the girl exclaims, does he really think he can stay healthy, eating only meat? Her words bring him into numbness. The Afa looks interested in the hero, trying to understand what was the cause of his surprised expression. However, he assures that he fully agrees. Such a moderate answer is surprised. But he later realizes that in this world, the concept of balanced nutrition is familiar. However, now the main thing for him is the meat of a hidden giba. He gets his parents again and begins to cut the fat. The blade easily passes through it. The hero immediately notices. The knife is in excellent condition. This tool can be without any difficulty to prepare any dish. Suddenly, he decides to ask if there is some kind of spices or something edible in this house. To give him space for reflection, the girl replies that they have fruit wine and salt. The hero especially focuses on the latter. She assured that if you eat 3 rs and 2 gibbon meat, you can forget about illness for a long time. She also added that salt is required to prepare dried meat. Meanwhile, the hero noted that the girl suddenly became dissatisfied. He understands that if the meat is dried with salt, people will certainly notice that it does not deteriorate due to this seasoning. At this point, the Afa disappears for a short time, and then returns, bringing with it salt and fruit wine. The hero takes a large fabric, and when it unfolds it, a blue stone salt opens in front of him. The girl explains that this salt is needed for exchange, and notes that it is enough to buy the horns of 1 giba. After that, she asks not to waste salt in vain. Then Asuta finally realizes why she has ruined his mood and assures that he will use salt more carefully. At the same time, he confesses to himself that he also wanted to taste fruit wine. But suddenly the hero notices. The girl, as if nothing happened, takes the jug and begins to drink wine, and then shouts something loudly. He asks whether it is too early to use wine at that age, and suggests that it does it from despair. The girl calmly assures she is 17. The girl adds that she decides whether to drink her or not. And at this moment, Asuta recalls that here is not Japan. He guesses that the calendar in this world is different, and therefore she could have lived not as many years as she called. But suddenly he exclaims that they are one age. The girl does not understand why she is this information, and the hero in response notes that there is nothing important about it. Her reaction is as incomprehensible as its explanation. After that, it is taken again before cooking. First, he decides to take an aria, an ingredient similar to onions and hobapsk meat, about 900 grams, and begins to cook further. In boiling water, the hero adds about 15 grams of stone salt, and then the meat. A little time has passed, and a lot of scum appeared on the surface. Then he decides to remove him, because he does not want to repeat the mistake that I have yesterday. It is at this moment that a girl with a firewood in her hands comes to the room. However, Asuta asks her to wait a little. She stops with surprise because she always immediately threw firewood into the fire. The girl cannot tread what to put it off, because if the meat does not cook in boiling water, it simply cannot be eaten. The hero agrees with her and explains that that is why he wants to cook the meat slowly, over low heat. In places where there is still fresh fat, a lot of deposits have formed, but it has removed a significant part of it, so it decides to boil the meat well. He then explains the girl that the problem lies in something like potatoes, and she calls him a poitin. However, the hero notes that he cannot put this confusion in the boiler. Asuta noted that she insisted too much on Zetitan and the apparale. But in response, she noticed that he did not understand anything. She explained, if you eat the meat of the giba, add 2 potitans, 3 arias, and peak leaves, it will bring great strength. AIFA notes that such forces can last all day, and calls it the wisdom of forest peoples. At that moment, the hero understands that it is very reminiscent of the diet of Sums, dried meat for breakfast, and in the evening the body receives all the necessary nutrients. Then the girl dares to ask when it will be possible to eat, because the famine makes herself known. The sun was already hiding behind the horizon, and the hero assures her that it will happen very soon. He approaches the cauldron and tells the girl that there will soon be even more scum. From these words, her facial expression changes. She asks whether the water is still boiling, but the answer sounds, and it decides to measure the level again. He then explains that he will add orear and cook for about an hour. Aifa again asks if it is really needed, and the hero answers the affirmative. He notes that cooking now lasts 2 to 3 times longer than yesterday, which is why the girl falls to the ground. Hearing this, the hero becomes confused and apologizes to her. But the oppressed Afa falls to the ground, begins to crawl, and reproaches to himself, which, although she assured in trust, has not even tried to find out the details. Asuta realizes that she is terribly hungry, almost in despair because of it, but still asks her to suffer a little. He is overwhelmed by confidence, and he promises to treat it with a truly delicious dish. He then throws fire with firewood and the water soon boils. After that, new portions of pico leaves fly to the cauldron. Finally, after waiting a little more, the hero reports that the hippie soup is ready. He presents this dish a Faye, convincing that she has been waiting for this for so long, and invites you to eat as much as she wants. The girl draws attention that he did not bring the fountain, but the hero asks her first to taste. After that, they sit on the table and start a meal. The hero remains nearby, realizing that he has achieved his goal. He managed to prepare a sweet soup in which the spices were harmoniously combined with meat. But suddenly he looks at the girl. In response, only silence came. Then the hero decides to gather with the spirit and taste the meat that was teased. As he puts a piece in his mouth, he feels like lard and meat slowly melting. The delicate taste spills, and the soup clearly guesses the hard work of the courier. The hero is aware that he has prepared the dish is delicious, but the girl's behavior only exacerbates his anxiety. In the end, he dared to turn to her and ask if she liked this soup. However, she confidently replies that the impression of food does not make any sense. Then he suddenly realizes how much time he spent on cooking, and asks whether it was really useless. The girl replies that for her food is a means of survival that has neither taste nor sentiments. However, when the hero almost loses hope, she still adds to what he knows exactly what she has called delicious. Aifa notes that the food process itself is pleased, and adds that she felt true joy, tasting something delicious. The girl concludes that she solved why the hero is so passionate about cooking, and where his shyness comes from. Without finding the appropriate words, she eventually admits, he has right. Seeing the expression of Sutra's face, she asks him not to look like this. She reports that he got a delicious dish, but he only thanks. In his soul, he realizes that he actually wants to recognize his existence, because his heart burns. It has been 4 days since then. Now the greatest difficulty for him was that he did not learn how to prepare poitan. Before noon, he is engaged in harvesting shrubs and herbs, and after that, having received permission from A5, studies the fountain. Asuta is allowed to use only 1.10 per day. He then notes that when this plant is boiled, it becomes soft. If you fry, crumble. And if you fry in oil, large dusty pieces are formed. However, the hero adds that the potian is also bitter, and he does not understand what to do with it. Suddenly, he is interrupted by Afashi sharply orders him to silence. The hero immediately apologizes and welcomes her on his return. It turns out that while the hero prepares the potion, the girl goes hunting. Returning, she tells him that she wants to make a gift. The hero receives her clothes and dagger from her. The girl tells that these things have inherited her father, and the hero will hesitate whether they should be accepted. She then confesses that she feels shame on the riverbank near him, where he usually washed. Seeing that he does not understand, she explains. His snow-white clothes are very different, and that is why she becomes awkward for him. In the end, the hero agrees and promises to treat her carefully. However, the girl just smiles with reproach, considering his behavior stupidity, and asks if he already guessed how to make the potion delicious. The costume replied that the case was not moved from the place at the moment, and has now decided to use paragraph 10 less often, because the girl allocates valuable products to him, but he could not change anything. However, the girl claims that it is impossible, because there are 2 eating and 3 zones, so it is not related to any disease. The hero draws attention to her good health, and suggests that the reason lies in proper nutrition. But suddenly it comes to the illumination. He realizes that, assuming that Arya is a bulb, then in its food composition is lacking one important element. The girl does not understand his reaction. Suddenly he rushes to her. The hero moved her best, because it was thanks to her that he found the answer. The hero is aware that poitan is a grain culture. He does not want to imagine that the Aina does not receive carbohydrates, and he recalls that the taste of this plant was reminiscent of flour. After that, he concludes that zakan is a grain culture like potatoes, although it cannot be sure of it. So he decides to conduct an experiment to see. It is going to cook a new spin dish. Asuta recalls that after hugging the girl unexpectedly, she cleaned him well and then moved to hunt. The hero thinks that the eating loses viscosity during boiling and dissolves in water. From this he concludes, in fact, it is already a flour dissolved in water. So, he decides, you just need to make a flour again. It cooks spin in a small amount of water until it turns into a jelly, then puts it in fire and leaves to dry in the sun for an hour. When the mass completely solidifies, the hero grinds it to a state of flour and decides to dissolve in water. It then puts the mixture on fire and receives a kind of wheat flour, which can be used as a thickener. At that moment, he dares to challenge because he had ever raised his doubts. But he soon thinks, will Ifa be satisfied with his decision? When she returns, he reports that she is about to try to cook a new dish. She only indifferently replies that he does, as he sees fit. After that, she lies in the posture of sleeping Buddha, keeping the angry facial expression. That is why Asut decides to relieve tension. He explains that she just tries her father's clothes. But the Appa in response notes that it does not fit him at all. In the end, the hero just takes the cooking. He removes the ingredients and notices that the meat has not spoiled even in 5 days. It is surprising. After that, the hero is taken to cut the products, occasionally looking away. Asuta uses butter instead of smalt, twisting the cut surface and swelling of the aroma of fruit wine. The girl closely monitors his every movement. To the toasted aria and fleshy giba, it adds salt, peak, and a drop of magical extract. The hero adds to the decoction of the eaten as a thickener and begins to stir the resulting mass. He decides to leave the fire small and notices that the stuffing came out surprisingly good. Pink. Then Asuta puts a fight, and the SVUP in one motion fastens one side of the cutlets over high heat, then the other. He then adds sliced arias and fruit wine. He notes that it is better to use the oven to cook on high heat, and expresses the hope that the cutlets will be delicious. But suddenly, the unexpected sound is heard behind him. The hero feels a slight fright and asks why the Ifa appeared here. But in response she states that it is its territory, and she has the right to come here when she wants. Asuta covers a sense of pressure, because he decides that the girl became interested in him. Subsequently, he asks her to hold the plate, and she immediately fulfills his request. The hero is a little surprised that she has been waiting for so long and asking for food again. The situation is repeated. Nothing happens again. Then he decides to add more sauce and appeals to Ifu to bring plates to water the cutlets. She instantly fulfills this request. As for Asura itself, he notes her agility, and later informs the girl that the cutlets are ready, and then leaves the room. Subsequently, he got the bread and notes that it was from Zuten that he made it. It turns out that it is enough to heat the flour and water from Zuten, and the mixture looks like a rice base. Suddenly, the hero proposes to hurry with the meal so that the food does not have time to cool. Sitting at the table, he welcomes everyone's wishes, unlike the girl. He then notices that she grunts something under her nose. The hero notes that meat bread is much better, and begins to think about whether he will be able to accept the conversation himself. Finally, he decides to do it. It begins to envelop the rich taste of meat in the smell of fruit wine. The cutlets were juicy and perfectly roasted. In addition, these dishes were perfectly combined with baked petin. The hero recalls what effort he had ever eaten when Ifa suddenly wonders why he smiles. It quickly returns him to reality, and he decides to ask if she liked the dish. But suddenly he notices that the girl almost milked the whole portion and cutlet. She replies that she was delicious, and the hero thanks her. After that, he asks to tell more, but she immediately refuses. Then he decides to apologize for hugging her. However, suddenly the girl is embarrassed, states that she is tired of him, and refuses to continue the conversation. The hero continues to look at her confusedly, and it becomes even more aware of it. She asks Asut not to behave so, and he decides that if she said that the dish is delicious, that is enough. Suddenly, a girl looks out from behind the horn and is wondering that they eat. The hero is immediately interested in who it is. He did not have time to answer how the Ifa turns to her, calling Rimi Rui, and advises to return home. Then the hero realizes that the girls are familiar to him, but Rome reminds that she has not seen them for a long time. She begins to question what they feed, and makes the hero that the hero is a Yofil man. But Yofil immediately refutes this opinion, and the hero, in turn, asks who this girl is at all. The girl is represented by Rimi, and reports that she is friends with Ifoam. At the same time, she confesses that she does not tolerate children like Rimi, and advises her to return home. The girl flashes, and the hero notices that the Afa treated her roughly. Then the Afa confesses that she lied to her, and explains that she has called for the anger of the Song family. Because of this, a girl from the Ryu family may have trouble caused by the Ifa. However, in the end, Ifa decides to let go of the girl, and he begins to be genuinely rejoiced. She recalls that her father said, "The Song family is not so scary." But the girl in response points out that the head of the Dunru family is completely different. At this point, the main character is finally lost in their conversation, and does not understand what it is about. Then he decides to remind himself of it, and at that moment Rimi notes that her father forbade her to approach suspicious people. However, Asut notices that she still came to him. The girl explains that in Jir Fao's robes, he no longer seems a stranger. The hero concludes that Jir Fa, father to Fao. Suddenly, Rime suggests that the girl has accepted him to her family because she gave him these things. That is why it begins to justify. The hero feels an image because of such behavior, so he decides to offer her food and calm down. However, suddenly, Rima's attention attracts food again. The hero tells that this dish is made of meat and eaten, and the girl immediately asks her to let her taste. Then he stretches her cutlet and notes that it is not simple giba meat. He then specifies whether he thus violates some prohibition. Asuta realizes that he has already made a lot that he would not allow himself in Japan. And now he hopes to hear the impression of food, not only from I5. The girl exclaims that it is delicious, and is genuinely surprised by the taste of the giba, which is very pleasing to the main character. She grabs him with joy and begins to shake from side to side vigorously, asking for cooking. It is then that Asuta understands how great the power she owns. Suddenly, Afa is aware that Rimaeus has not warned that it was strictly forbidden to interfere with food. She immediately causes the girl to apologize. At this point, the hero gradually recovers and expresses his gratitude. After that, the woman notes that she is already dark and advises the girl to return home. She thanks for the treat and asks the hero how his name is. It is called Tsurami Asuta, while gently correcting her wrong pronunciation. Suddenly Rimi appeals to Ayuf to give the elder of the genus Rugao to taste this dish, because he will leave them soon. The hero fades for a moment, confusing his eyes to the girl. Aifa asks if the hero is really going to go to the house. He confirms. Yes, because Giba's grandmother is an important person for both her and Remains. Then the hero decides at least to protect someone, and the story is transferred to the previous day. He asks if Grandma Giva will come when the lunch is ready. That is, the next evening. AIFAA, he notes that according to tradition, Asuti should be visited at home. Therefore, she decides to ask to come for them earlier. Ru agrees and thanks for the warm reception. Suddenly, the hero notices that the girl got bored. She confesses that she also sought to help Remy, but at the same time intended to give up. Hearing this, he asks why she still did not refuse. The Ifa said that 2 years ago, after an altercation with a Diab, she received an offer from the head of Rukas to join their family through marriage. However, she refused because she sought to live the life of a thinker. The hero noted that in such a situation anyone could get lost. According to the girl, Dona Ryu, the head of the family, smiling, noted that in this case, the sons will either not dare to touch her, or in response will be destroyed. That is why Ayafa refused and completely torn the relationship with Ryu. The hero notes that these family ties are contrary to freedom of will. However, the girl assures that so their fate has already developed. It adds that the trouble is that the Ryu genus has too many branches, even by the standards of the forest surrounding area. That is why she does not want to have business with them, but the girl is concerned that the hero may be involved in the enmity between these families. He immediately makes her aware that she does not want to see such an expression on her face. He says he wants to see the smile of his rescue. In response, she sincerely thanks him. After that, the story goes to the present. Asuta noted Rimi that she didn't need to be so polite, and added that it is good that she came earlier. She was waiting for a job that would not avoid dust. But in the end, they move on the road. And on the road, the hero pays attention. The houses in the settlement are built with taste. Unlike the AI-50 dwelling, Rimi, as Rimi points out, now has 13 relatives, which is amazing the hero. Asuta suggests that he will be able to find enough utensils for so many people in their home, because he was allowed to use utensils, and the girl agrees with him. Suddenly, Aifa stretches her dagger, which makes the hero think. However, Rimi points out that he has to do it before he enters a foreign home. When they arrive, Asuta covers some numbness, and Afa is surprised to be aware that he has not seen any woman but her and Rimi here. Soon, they are represented by Tisha Shinra, the widow of the previous head, as well as a united eldest daughter, and Regina, the average daughter of the family. The name of the latter seems to the hero to familiar, and awakens his memories of the past. He appeals to the Rainy from his family, and apologizes to her for promising to prepare a stew from a boar for her, but failed to restrain her promise. While everyone communicates around them, Asuta suddenly remembers his father. He mentally apologizes to him for leaving him himself. Although the guy tries to hold on, this thought almost brings him to tears. Suddenly, someone distracts him without letting it be felt. Suddenly he feels her gaze and notes that this name belongs to one of his acquaintances. However, the girl notices that he is sad and decides that the reason for it is herself. Asuta categorically denies this. insisting that in fact everything is completely different. But suddenly Ramian notes that she has already introduced him to all the rules, and is amazed at how quickly everything ended. After that, the girl decides to finally introduce herself and the main character. She reports that today, at the request of Ryimi, everyone gathered here to use a home fire in the Ru Hausa. At this point, Tisho Shin welcomes the guests and announces that he will help the hero to cope with the Rina to teach him to cook this dish. Suddenly, Vienna turns to him and asks if he was born in another country, while explaining why she is curious about why he never tells about his place of birth. He decides to admit that he was born in Japan and has never heard about continental Amishole. At the same time, while the girl is thinking about it, he notes that it may not be easy to understand him. Suddenly she calls him a stranger who knows nothing about Amos Cole here in the heart of the continent, and smiles slightly, letting understand her doubt. After that, Remy invites everyone to the fire, and as soon as the hero crosses the threshold of the room, immediately pays attention to the fire for frying meat and for cooking. Going to the house, the hero decides to use their fire. Suddenly, Reina asks whether he would cook the meat, because she heard he wanted to cook it softer for Jigby. He is surprised to note how observant she is. The girl told him that she heard the boys would bring their meat, because the family has already prepared for themselves. However, he only noted that some things are still a mystery of this day. He specifies that it means jewelry on their neck, made of 3 kibuls. Rin explains that it is a health charm, so that women do not participate in hunting. The hero concludes that it is not just a currency, but rather some decoration. Suddenly, his attention is distracted by the girls who carry the go. Seeing the dissatisfied grimace of A Fire, he is anxiously quickly taken to cooking. At this point, the Tisho should have wondered if the girl really caught this giba, but she confidently replied that yes. Then the woman confessed that she could not even imagine how it was. However, Ifa noted that her father was taught and survived. After that, the woman decides that she is doomed to die alone, because no one needs. She summarizes that the family Fa'it will soon disappear if she does not give birth to children. At this point, Remy is interested in whether there is enough water in the pan, and the hero assures that so much is needed. It cuts the meat, then looks around to determine what mood the Apa is. But, seeing her upset and cheerful face, the hero immediately begins to worry, trying to understand what happened. However, he quickly takes his hands and returns to cooking. He notices that the potion has already boiled and warns, if you do not remove it in time, it will completely thicken and turn into glue. After that, he adds that it seems as if the rind had previously been cooked. She, in response, notes that she tried many ways to facilitate Jigbata. Then Asuta decides to trust her and shares the recipe. He removes the meat later, but notes that she has never seen anything like this before. Subsequently, he explains that this meat is taken from the Guba blades. Taishu Tires explained the girl that this family has only their feet. It is a real novelty for them. The hero remembered how he did the Andy, and came to the conclusion, herself is not enough to be a real family. The woman agrees and explains that their husbands catch 2 gibas daily, cut off their feet, and throw the remains into the gorge so that the inhabitants of the forest cannot use them. These remnants will eat munto, which will return the giba soul to the forest. The hero notes that the rest cannot be thrown away. Then St. Show adds that it is because of this that the people can appear without pride, which will extract meat from the Junis without power. He later notes that the customs are quite harsh here, and reports that he is about to cut meat. After that, a little helps the boys in cooking, with them get minced. Remy said it was fun. But suddenly the hero mistakenly accepts a star for another person and reports that he should now prepare some dish for the Acre Ara. After that, he asks the girl to bring him to the pantry and decides to seek help for the Ifu. Once in place, he calls the room a real treasure trove. The girl shows a certain area, but suddenly Ryan approaches the hero and offers some more products. However, the hero politely refuses, after which he remains alone with Afoy. The heroine remembers her feelings when she first saw the pantry and calls for the girls to return. But suddenly, the Aya begins to hear someone's voice. A sharp and full aggression. Remy ran out of Dandas's father, and Asuta immediately realized, this is the man who first spoke with Ifa about the wedding. Suddenly, the man noticed Asuta, and recognizing in him a stranger who appeared in the house of Fez, he was interested in watching, because he really corresponds to the description of the White Crow, which rumors would spread. The hero recognizes in the man of the same Donaru, who was so afraid of Appa and convinces himself not to be afraid. Donaru appeals to the girl, calling her the one who has disgraced her honor at home and marks her courage because she dared to appear here again with a stranger. Then he asks whether she continues to show their disdain for them. Suddenly, Rimi exclaims with indignation that she has already warned they will come to cook food for the elder, and Dando has already given permission. The man explains to her that if they, as gibbeters, stop eating a lip, then doomed to disappear. The girl tries to deny this thought. Suddenly she is interrupted by the guy, noting that their father, though good, but not always and not everywhere. In response, she asks him to silence, contacting him, Ruto. The hero explains that he has no evil intentions. He came to them only to prepare food that will help Jar, as Rimi asked for it. After that, he seems as the keeper of the fire from the House of Fans, which is quite striking. Don Dittel eagerly urges him to rush, turning to him as a small one. He returns to the kitchen and takes to prepare the last cutlet, while asking that the rest of the dishes serve at the table. He is still afraid to look and meet with Fine, because he just survived a failed conversation with the head of another family. Suddenly, Ryan announces that the table is already covered and everyone is going in the hall. Then Asura decides to go inside and sees many people in the room, among whom it is a tired Jibbar. They begin to pray, and the hero notes that the Ina also repeats this prayer. He understands. Because of this, he did not hear how she thanked him. The hero realizes that these people, though slightly different from him, are in fact the same as him. So he concludes that they will never leave their family in trouble. At that moment, the Rhine tries to feed Jibbarua with a cutlet when the dish suddenly crumbles. The Jibbar has frozen, and it introduces the hero into numbness. The girl looks at her with anxiety, and Danda jokingly points out that such a soft meat porridge and food is difficult to call it, offering her mantle. Notwithstanding, the grandmother is raised, contrary to the Reina's request to stay still. The man notes that she is probably also angry with the hero, and suddenly she returns to him sharply. Aba, Ru, calls Donna a child who has not changed even after many years. At that moment, others watched with surprise that she got up and spoke. Giba adds that it should not be considered unacceptable to everyone that one person does not like, because such logic is peculiar to children. After these words, the Rhine finally persuades her to sit down. Grandmother confesses that he is no longer at the age to do this, and returns to the hero. She asks if it is possible to continue after being eaten, and of course, he agrees. Finally, the girl treats her cutlets. She admits with gratitude that thanks to the heroine she remembered ancient times when they were not yet called the Forest People, and they remained part of the people of Jigal. She says that in the south they lived happily, collected fruits and caught lizards. But then the war began, the forest was burned, and they were sent to the western forests, as did Gebetsor. According to Jiba, the mountain did not show any mercy to them. One by one they died of starvation, and even if they were lucky enough to overcome this beast, his meat was not eaten at all. She confesses that Giba meat is too rigid and has a bad smell, so sometimes it seemed to be better to die than to consume such food. After that, Jiba Rui thanks Asuti, because he felt the joy of food again. However, the hero lightly squeezes these words, assuring that he only showed how to cook. But suddenly, the grandmother decides to bless him and remove one pendant from the necklace to give his grandson. He was almost going to give up, because this Fang got Jibi from her family, but suddenly Ren whispers so that he would accept him as a fee for today's help. Then the rest also joins, blessing the hero and handing him one Fang, except for one exception. Asud, however, receives a lot of donated Fangs. Dawn warns him not too proud of himself, because he is indifferent to the opinion of others. Then the man accuses the hero of pushing his poison, and then begins to slowly dive into numbness. But suddenly he is covered by a strong fear. He decides that he will now be executed for his act, and that it is defeat. However, the girl reassures him, urging not to worry. At that moment, the Ifa draws attention to the fact that everyone thanked the boy and blessed him, so he asks not to pay attention to the words of that man. She adds that this time she did somewhat special, but it suddenly interrupts Jibaru. The woman calls the girl to come closer to see how she changed and grown. When the APA approaches her, her grandmother Hobby notes how good she grew up, adding that the girl is extremely similar to her mother. Overfilled with emotions, the Afa cannot hold back tears and begins to cry. She confesses that she is ashamed because she did not keep in touch with Jibaru. In response, he assures that the girl is not worried and begins to calm her down. She advises to speak more slowly, emphasizing that they have enough time. At this point, The hero sighs relief, hoping that AI Philly's relationship with the Rufev family at least a little. Suddenly, the guy addresses him. Noticing that he is already dark, he invites the hero to stay overnight. Subsequently, Asuta goes outside and reports that he was told about one empty hut. However, the real problem is how to find it, because all the homes look the same here. Then he realizes that his appearance did not waste his appearance here, because the day was fruitful, and he thinks whether AI, it is a little easier whether it feels a little better. The hero is aware that everyone has his or her tastes, so it is natural that someone praised him and others do not. However, being a beginner in the kitchen, he feels shame, and Dandam's words about poison do not give him rest. Suddenly, because of his back, a noise comes. It is a very frightening hero. Venus appears in front of him and asks what he does here. However, making sure that Asuta is not busy, she invites him to share his thoughts alone. However, the hero turns to the girl again, and she finally confesses that it can only talk to him. He recalls that her wine won Rue, and is surprised to notice that she does not give the impression of an evil person. It makes him even more wonder why she generally decided to talk to him. Suddenly, she turns to Asuta and asks if he knows the way to get out of the forest and live in the outside world. He begins to guess what is being discussed, but looks away, avoiding it. And only then does she realize that she had already started keeping his common secrets with him. But in the end, Venus assured that it would come, though not now, and asked not to forget about it when it happened. After these words, she said goodbye and left silently. The hero thinks about the world around him, and concludes that she probably meant not his world, but some place in the middle of the forest. Suddenly, he is distracted by an unexpected noise, and he sees in front of him F.A. After that, Asuta instantly comes to her senses and realizes that she has already completed the conversation with her grandmother. She confirms his assumption and asks why he is still here. Easton. The hero explains that all these buildings look the same, and it is unclear which one to enter. However, the girl noted that he was talking to some nonsense, and explained, if he was ordered to use a house where no one was in, then it is enough to just find something where the light does not burn. In the end, the hero understands the course of her thoughts and feels awkward. They decide to move on. The hero talks about the murder that has happened behind the closed door, however, when Ifa asks whether he said something, refuses and denies. When Asta wakes up, the girl immediately reports that they return home. She notes that the blessing has already been received, and she is going to hunt. Seeing that he continued to lie down, the Aif had already wanted to turn to the hero, as he suddenly jumped and asked how much he fell. The girl immediately noticed that she was not good, and wondered if everything was fine with him. He replies that everything is fine with him, and adds that he will rest later. However, Aifa asks him not to worry, because this time she has brought him a hassle, so now she has to thank properly. The hero draws attention that today she is particularly similar to an angel who is about to rise to heaven. At the same moment, he lowered to the floor, which scared the girl. Asuta assures that everything is fine. Just this night he was not enough. Of course, he was worried that he had to spend the night in another's house. However, since the Aifa behaved, as always, he gradually calmed down. The hero remembered how he compared everything around the girl's house, although she had long wanted to turn off the light. However, his reflections again occupied the words of Dandaru, spoke after dinner about the poison. The hero wondered what a man meant because he used ordinary ingredients, and it was clearly not in tastes. However, he later wondered whether it was worth worrying, because Rimi's desire was already fulfilled, and an AI Phi became one problem. But did he really do enough? Suddenly, the hero picks up and realizes that he has not done enough. Asuta is thought to be that he is the son of a chef and a household hearth at the house of Ifile. In addition, the hero is also fond of cooking. He especially likes the moment when someone is happy to taste the dishes prepared on their own, just as it was once in the father's cafe. He is convinced that there is no dish that would like absolutely everyone. He is well known. But when someone calls his culinary work poison, the hero cannot put up with it. It is then that he thinks how to please Dand. However, for many hours he has no thought. The girl notices that he is probably tired and offers him a little rest until she goes to talk to Rue. The hero, without objections, agrees with her idea. He realizes that no matter how much he thinks, nothing can be solved. Then the hero suggests that a walk in the open air may help to put in mind. Outing the outside, he hears the male voices somewhere nearby. Basuda decides that this is probably ordinary hunters. Involuntarily he thinks, yesterday the blessing was given mostly women, and he almost did not receive it from men. However, he does not know how to ask about it. Suddenly, someone turns to him with a bold call. The hero captures a slight fear, because in this man he recognizes a boy named Rudo, who gave him a blessing yesterday. With anxiety, he asks what happened, assuming that Asura was looking for one of the women. The hero concludes that the oar at least partially listens to him, but immediately begins to doubt it. In response, he explains that he is looking for some of the women, and the guy refers to that they went to the river. Asuta seems to be numb and asks him again. But he stubbornly repeats that the girls went to the river to wash his clothes. From these words, the hero is finally lost, and does not find what to answer. Then Ruda assumes that he probably does not know where this place is, and decides to show him the way. However, soon the hero begins to assure that there is no need for it. At that moment it seemed to be faced with two forces. One persuades not to be ashamed, the other desperately states that it is unattainable. It is covered by panic fear. He imagines how he is scalp and his eyes out, as he has promised an Ifa. The guy turns and again invites the Asura to follow him. In response, he begins to shout that he will kill the boy, and if not, then he will first make him feel hell on the ground, and then will deprive his life. At this point, Rudo understands that Asura is embarrassed and smiles. In the end, they reach the right place where the sounds of water splash. Rudo explains that the girls are washed behind those partitions, and asks him not to hesitate once he has come here, and then strongly pushes forward. Asuta is covered by a wave, and it falls ashore, realizing that it is an end. The girls notice him and are genuinely surprised by the unexpected appearance, and suddenly notice that he is already faint. Suddenly, the APA appears from the boards, which again states that there will be no swim. However, after noticing the Asu'd lying on earth, she immediately listens to the words of Ravina, which explains that it was wrong with him. Then the APA asks the girls not to approach the boy and decides to understand the situation on their own. Rainy wanted to be denied, but finally decided not to interfere. When the hero mastered himself a little, she wondered carefully if everything was fine with him. In the meantime, Vienna drew attention to that the Ina is worried about her home. He hears the voice of Aphile. She suddenly lends to make sure that he is alive and whether his heart is beating, closing his face with his chest. The girl reports that the heart beats, and Asut, meanwhile, is surprised. He does not understand what is happening. It seems to him that he is about to suffocate with something soft, and such death seems to him even pleasant. But suddenly the hero begins to beg for salvation, and at that moment the girl recedes from him. She asks if he remembers her. After that, the hero notices that the girl looks worse than usual, and does not have time to get up, as he gets on the head. Subsequently, they leave the shore, and the girl decides to apologize for her act. The hero is aware that he could not hide the surprise from what happened next. It seems that the generation of his parents considered him a man, while Asutus perceived him as a woman. As a rule, it is men who are not the keeper of the hearth. Now he is no longer poison. The young man squats under a tree, and the hero is wondering that the Afa would want to dine today. The girl replies that she wants cutlets, but he notes she asks them every time. Then she explains, in cutlets, meat is usually tender. Only now he realizes she likes this dish because of softness. Because of this, the Ifa asks him to be silent, but at a moment, he again remembers the softness of her breasts, and a wave of anxiety covers it. The hero is aware that these people are different, and thanks Afa mentally. He then addresses her, deciding to ask another chance. He intends to treat Danda again, who called his dish poison, and he will need the help of a girl who heads the house. She confessed that she was feeling the debt to him for that case, and the APHA decided to help. She wondered if there was a chance of success, and in response, she heard a confident promise. There is undoubtedly a chance. After that, they go to Dona, and he is interested in what purpose they came. Then the APA reports that he has a request. She states that she would like the hero to prepare a treat for the house of Ryu. The man only smiles and decides that they are ridiculed, but the hero assures, he says quite seriously. Then the man promises to show Asuti what happens when to confuse desperation with courage, and decides to arrange a special scene for him in 3 days. Asuta and Aifa sat on the floor in the house. Aifa, turning to the protagonist, reported that after talking to Danda, he conveyed, In 3 days he would be waiting for a culinary business. He will need to prepare dishes for a wedding celebration in the house of routine. The hero thought about her words and lowered her gaze. He only said something about the wedding. The girl also took her eyes and only confirmed the heard. At the same time, Afa explained that this time it is not only about routes, but also routing, so the conditions are much more complicated than before. But the girl warned him that the house of Rutima also belongs to the RU family. If something happens to them suddenly, the whole family will oppose them, and the house of FA will become an exile in the forest. Aifa, annoyed, began to say that then she and he, but never finished the phrase. In fact, he assumed that the girl could suffer because of him. However, she approved his desire for revenge. Raising from the floor, he clenched his fist and stated with her unbreakable determination that they should certainly be lucky. After his words, he smiled warmly, and the Afa was already confused, not knowing what to answer. Then she remembered that the protagonist assured that they have every chance of winning. After that, they simultaneously lifted their fists up and hit them with each other. Asuta expressed confidence that he would certainly be planned, and Aifa fully supported his opinion. For a while they went on the road. A bag hung on her shoulders, and the girl was wrapped in a dark cloak. They walked silently. The protagonist thought that he was always looking for poison among the ingredients. His suspicion of compatriots was probably considered strange compared to all previous dishes. At the same time, he was aware that his food was also surprisingly easy to chew. After his gaze, he thought that because everything was in this way, he should handle it using the ingredients available. His reflections were interrupted by Afa, who turned to him and reported that they were already approaching the house. Asura nodded briefly, making it clear. The girl reported that at his request asked Rei Rui to talk to the women to help them. She did not have time to finish the sentence, as the one who was mentioned, called the protagonist named. There were 4 more girls behind Rimi. She explained that she had fulfilled his request and called for free women. So many people gathered. Rina Roos noted that, in her opinion, it would be good to help Astuti. Vinru wondered what he needed help. The protagonist smiled widely at all present, gently stroked Rimi on his head, and thanked everyone with sincere heart. However, he just smiled, and noted that this time he did not need help. The Rhine and the Branch opened their mouths in surprise without hiding their surprise. Meanwhile, in the house of Rutima, the head of the family told his son that he would soon marry. He put a jar on a table with a loud knock. The head smiled widely and noted who would have thought that such a luxurious wedding was organized in the house. A jar stood in front of him. Suddenly the smile disappeared from his face, and he asked Gazlan what had happened. He calmly replied that they had guests. Both turned and saw that the Asuta and the Ihef stood on the doorstep of their home. Gazlan explained that Dandaru had just spoken about them. The girl came in touch and reported that, having gained recognition of the Rus, they have the honor of being in their home. She named her name and presented the main character, noting that he is part of her family. The girl assured that they would help preparation for the festive feast. The head of the family clenched his fists and, agreeing with her words, turned to the girl, inviting her to enter her home. After that, he strongly hit his fist in the air in front of him and, shining his eyes in his eyes, ordered anyone and thoughts not to allow him to spoil the wedding of his beloved son. Asuta remained standing without finding words for the elder. Gazlan turned to him and said that he was grateful to everyone for his willingness to come to the rescue. His father was completely right. The son closed her eyes and said that not only they, but all of them, should be rejoiced in this festive moment, because that is what she wants. Asuti thought about the last words of the son for a long time. Leaving the house, the Appa turned to him, noting that she only needed to prepare everything for twilight when the wedding began. The protagonist assured that he understood everything, and would surely have time to set everything out on time. The girl turned to him, smiled, and noted that, although he had her reason, she still eagerly awaited his culinary masterpieces. Subsequently, he wore a workout costume. There were 3 large pieces of meat on the table. Each of them had the perfect cut. There were 3 girls near the table, watching the meat carefully. Vinru wondered if he brought 3 different types of meat today, isn't it? The Rhina asked if they would make a hamburger. However, the protagonist replied that this time everything would be different. He stopped in front of the table, and pointing to the meat, stated that he would use all 3 pieces differently. This statement surprised the Rhine, and she asked if all 3 would really go. Venus also noted that it sounds quite interesting. After a while, the Aya, along with the Asut, arrived at the wedding playground. In the center, surrounded by a fence, a large bonfire stood as one of the main colors of the holiday. One of the heroes explained to them what a solemn ceremony would happen here. The protagonist said with delight that this fire was simply incredible. He was interested in how to light such a great fire at all. The girl answered these words that it is worth waiting. The real culprits of the holiday will appear. As if hearing her, the newlyweds came to them, Gazlan Rutim and Ama Sg Chin. The bride was lower than her companion with dark hair. Asuta looked at them and noticed that Gazlan's father was not present. At that moment, he was called by Afa. There was a noticeable tension on her face. She wondered why he was looking only at the bride. It is unhappy. The protagonist in response was only surprised. Sutra realized that something incomprehensible had happened again, and it could have turned to him with trouble. So he tried to justify himself. At that time, Gaslan's father, Dan, came with Dandaru. The first, seeing the covered table, smiled and noted that they had already prepared for the holiday. The protagonist, meeting their eyes, was a little confused. Elders came to the table. Before them stood food plates, cutlery, and most importantly, steaming hot dishes and pots. The chairman Rutem suggested to start a feast. 3 plates with lion meat were placed on the table, of which a couple was still rising, and an incredible aroma was wandered in the air. Initially, Dan Rutem smiled and noted that the wedding should be celebrated. But when he looked closely at the table, his smile gradually faded. He was very worried and noted that something was wrong here. Dandaru only stood silently and watched carefully at everything. The head began to ask loudly whether this unclean meat should give munto, and at the same time indignant that his son was compared to munto, while people around the whisper were discussing an unfortunate event. He persistently questioned who did it all and who brought the meat here. Asura put his hand on his chest and stated in a firm voice that it was he. Dan Rutem looked closely at him and remembered that he belonged to the house of Fa. He told the chief hero that he realized how important this holiday was, and still did so, asking if he really thought he would be able to avoid the consequences. But the main character interrupted him and suggested to taste these dishes. Dan grabbed the man by the collar and pulled out with indignation, asking what he had just said. He replied that the chief was justly angry. However, he was preparing for it in advance, remembering how his son insisted everyone should enjoy. The chairman Rutima let him go and wondered if Gosan really said. He confirmed that they were talking about it. Then his father struck himself with his palm on his stomach. After that, he turned to the main character and assured that if the dish was worse than the one eaten by Monto, they will immediately pay with him in full. Aifa lowered her head and, markedly nervous, grabbed her amuta. He stood, feeling the heart crazy. Dan asked them if everything was clear to them. Having in mind people from the house of Fa, the Rhine wanted to intercede for her friends, but Remy gently pulled her for her skirt, as if begging now. Meanwhile, the head took a piece of meat and lifted it to the mouth. He chewed every piece for a long time, and then took another, and one more, until he emptied all the dishes in front of him. Watching him, the protagonist realized that he had eaten all 3 pieces of meat at once. At the same moment, Dan returned to. A wide smile played on his face. He confessed that he really liked the 3rd kind of meat, so he asked. Afa and Asuta were only surprised to think that he changed his mind very quickly. The protagonist was in no hurry to fulfill his request, thinking. So Dan shouted that he would bring him meat faster. Hearing this, the hero nodded. He quickly replied that he understood, and rushed down his head sharply. He asked the interlocutor whether he really is telling the truth. Dan looked at him in surprise and assured that it was so. A new portion was put in front of his head, and he smiled, turned to Danda and suggested that he try. They say it will not take much time. He only thoughtfully agreed. Indeed, everything was that way. Dan Ryutum declared loudly to everyone that entertainment was renewed. People were happy about this news and immediately gathered closer to the fire. Asuta turned to the Rhina with a guilt in his eyes and sincerely apologized for drawing it into it all. But in response, she assured that there was nothing wrong with that, and asked to turn away. The protagonist, along with the vines, turned and saw that the father of Rua seems to eat the meat he prepared himself. Asutu was struck by what was faced with his eyes. Feeling someone's gaze, Dandaru returned without ceasing to chew a piece of meat. The main character has frozen in place, holding a plate with hot food in each hand. He looked at the dong and wondered that she touched his dishes. He, feeling his gaze, looked around and asked why this guy was looking so carefully at him. Asuta, meanwhile, put a plate of food before him. After that, he noted that this time he just eaten his dish in silence. Hearing this, Dandaru looked at him in surprise and asked with dissatisfaction. The Basuta felt from his gaze and voice on the body instantly ran ants. He turned and looked over his shoulder, noted that he had not said anything, and also apologized to interrupted the meal. The Pope Run replied that the impression was, perhaps because of his food was not poisoned. However, the protagonist turned over his shoulder, not understanding what he said. Don explained that this time its meat was not poisoned. The cheeks broke out in the Asuta, and the eyes were widely revealed from the shame after such words addressed to it. He thought again that his meat was not poison at all. He completely turned to Dandaru, intending to ask him a question. However, it was at that moment that Remy turned to him and wondered if something had to be brought. With a surprisingly serious expression of the face of the Pope, Ru explained that he was a hunter. All his life is hunting for work, and that is how he earns his existence. In addition, he should take care not only of himself, but also about those who cannot hunt on their own. Therefore, he must keep his teeth strong and suitable for chewing. And if it does not stop chewing, the soft meat prepared by the hero will turn into poison, and his teeth will weaken, like the teeth of Evis. He believed that it was the meat that this time prepared by Sweet, capable of strengthening his body. And only was the real reason. The protagonist already wanted to talk about how he prepared the meat this time. The words of the interlocutor were a little excited. But it was at this moment that Remy turned to him. She quickly came to him and asked to listen to her. However, the man smiled gently, reached out in front of him, and apologizing asked her to wait a little. Returning to Dona, he explained that today he brought with him only meat. He told what 3 types of meat are served on the table today: hard thighs, gentler cheeks, and medium hardness of a piece between the shoulder blades. It is difficult for him to chew dried meat, which is served in fiashus for breakfast. But hunters accustomed to such food, on the contrary, like such dishes, especially legs. For example, Rumi Roof prefers hips or meat between the shoulder blades. Dandaru broke him, looked straight into his eyes, and asked why he did so. Because food exists only to support the body. Asuta said that there was no special reason why he became a cook. He just wants different people when they gather at the table. Each of his dishes appealed. Pope Ryu laughed slightly, and noted that he understands well what his pride is. He blessed the protagonist specifically for this holiday, emphasizing that this blessing only concerns him. Then he extended him part of the necklace. The main character received the gift, feeling embarrassed. Rami Ru immediately flew to him from behind and knocked to the ground. She reminded him not to forget about her. Together they began to fall. Venus noted that it was because of her courage that the fire was appointed. It inspired her. Bremi, without paying attention to Venus, asked Asura if he had to fry the meat, whether it could already be tasted, because she tried so hard. The Rhine, in turn, asked if it was feeling well. Donaru, watching what is happening in front of him, and not hiding a surprise in his gaze, asked what all that means. Lifting his head from the floor, Asuta reported that this time he had brought meat, and also suggested that women use the ideas of the Rukau family. He looked after his daughter. They wondered if he noticed it. Then Remy raised her hand and added that she was already trying. The protagonist noted that, in his opinion, this dish would be served for dinner in the Ryu family. Raising from the floor, he shook his dust and continued his story. He believed it would happen when the Jibbar came. It was at that moment that he saw the face of the oldest woman from that family, and Rudy Rudd, as soon as he heard this name, immediately imagined a funny man who absorbs food with great appetite. All, elderly and children, men and women, gather together for dinner. This is the most important time for the family. Donaru lowered his eyes, thinking about his own words. A little later he returned to the main character and spoke about his family. Then Dan Rudum approached him behind him, crossing his arms on his stomach. Smiling, he noted that he did not make such a gloomy look. Asuta was surprised again, and when he turned to Remy, he wondered if there was still meat left. In response, the girl said that there was no additional meat, so she tried to ask him a question. The protagonist has several times poured cold sweat before he dared to inform this Rudum that the meat was gone. In response, he wondered whether it was only about meat or something else. The bridegroom shook his head in a way, though he thought that such a question was in vain. He was going to ask himself. The head of the family, Rutham, turned to return to the celebration, then turned to the heroes and invited them to join the feast. Asuta agreed, answering the affirmative. After that, Dan Rudum turned to Dandai Ruda, smiled, and reported that he had a conversation with him. Dandairu wondered what the conversation was about. It passed for a while, and Asuta, along with the Ifi, sat on the ground, holding their dinner. The protagonist noted that the night has come and the sky seems so high. The girl only quietly agreed with his words. The hero wondered if she was offended for some reason, but the girl denied. Then he asked if she was not angry because this time, Gidbeberg did not come, and again heard a negative answer from her. Ifa admitted that on this holiday she felt a certain, though small, pride in Asuta, but at the same time annoyance about herself. Hearing these words, the main character looked around. From the surprise, his mouth opened inadvertently, and his eyes were wide open. He did not even find words to answer. Yet, having mastered himself, he wondered that he was aware of pride and why she was annoyed. She replied that she could not stay here, because she is the mistress of the house, but at the same time she puts on him the duties of the keeper of the family fire. Then Asuta realized that the reason was that she did not want to strain him and tried to reassure someone else. He reached out to the girl, turned to her by his name, and asked him to listen. She sat looking to the side, and sadness was read on her face. He stood up, smiled, and, without letting her hands released, noted that there was nothing that he would do on his own. Precisely because AFAA. She connected his destiny with him. He was here. The girl reached out and agreed with him. Both raised their hands up. Afa advised him not to lose his zeal, calling him the keeper of the family hearth. The protagonist assured that he would make every effort, turning to her as a housewife. Gazlan looked at the strangers in surprise and asked his father why they were here. Dan Gutam, also considering the heroes, only said that it was unknown who they were. Ifa and Asuta, smiling and not lowering his hands, had a fun argued, who was rising higher. The father turned to Gazlan, noting that he may ask him another time. He just smiled sweetly on it, so his eyes were involuntarily closed and agreed. His bride noted that she would look forward to this moment. For a while, Afa and Asuta returned to the house. The girl dropped on his knees and thanked him for his efforts. She asked what he would like in response. The main character stood up and swayed to her. He tried to formulate his desire, repeating the word, then. After that, he dropped the folds to the floor and confessed that he would like to have such a soft fur carpet. The FIA leader replied that she understands his admiration, but reminded that this carpet belongs to the house, and they could not buy something similar yet. Asuta scolded and turned to her, assuring that he had only joked. The Ifa in response noted that that is why she said, she knows, it is impossible. He rolled his back and spoke of his sincere desire. The girl broke him, noting that it had to be talked about from the very beginning, but he did not pay attention to her words and wondered if she saw the pantry. He noted that if we are talking about values, they really have such blessings, and then asked if these blessings could be exchanged for something. The Ifa replied that they had almost no fruit wine. Asuta wondered where they bought it. The girl noted that most of the fact that he saw in the pantry of RU was already exchanged for a fang of Giba, and at a time translated the conversation to the question of his award. He looked carefully at her, apparently waiting for the explanation. She smiled and reported that tomorrow they would go shopping at the town of Genoz, located the edge of the road. He was surprised to ask if they would go to the city, not to the village. On the advice of AI-50, they went to the city. The protagonist encompassed alarming anticipation. The road ran through a suspension bridge, which was loudly rushed when I wondered if there was another way to the city. The girl smiled, condescending him, and noticed that there was no other way out. The costume mentally noted that it was too cruel. However, he came to think that the new way adds freshness to the journey, and these distances also heal the heart. Meanwhile, AIFAA. She addressed him, saying that they had already reached the cities, and advised to look around. She told him that it was Janos. He exclaimed enthusiastically. Before his imagination appeared the streets of the city, jams with food, large animals, and numerous people. He wondered that people around the hoods, and inadvertently asked himself a question whether he looks for them, of course, or fits into local ideas about the norm. Seeing a shop nearby, the guy went to her to find out what they were selling there. Suddenly a woman passed. Her face remained serious, and some tension was felt in her eyes. Harris turned after her. The Afa wondered what happened, what he assured that everything was fine. Just this place is too different from the forest familiar to him. The girl agreed with him, adding that from time to time people really come to trade. It surprised him. Looking around, he wondered if he seemed to him as if everyone was deliberately missing them. This caused him an unpleasant feeling. Ifa explained that you first need to exchange fangs for money. The protagonist nodded briefly, making it clear that he understood everything. They turned to the man with the intention to exchange. He turned away from them and, despite their direction, said that if they need to replace Jui's fangs, he would have to wait. The protagonist, glancing at him, twisted with dissatisfaction and thought that this man was clearly bad. He tried to contact A Fei, but she received the coins, noted that they now had something to pay. He agreed, but in his thoughts, noted how quickly he managed to do it. He promised to buy a lot, but in response she apologized and confessed that she was not too much money. After that, they purchased everything he needed. They went to different shops, and now sellers were noticeably nervous as they saw them. However, the APHA did not pay attention to it. She was happy to buy. Finally, everything was ready. The girl, holding a large bag firmly, said she managed to buy everything she needed. Asuta, who stood next to her and carried another bag on her shoulders, added that they really took a lot. She reported that she had a little more coins and wondered if she had to buy something. The protagonist agreed, and noticing another store, exclaimed. When he realized that they were mantas, asked whether they really sold food, and suggested buying something before returning home. He confessed that he wanted to taste a dish that he did not cook. The girl replied that she was not too fond of sweets, but could buy them. The Afa smiled widely, closing her eyes, and assured him that everything was fine. They would be able to buy food. For these words, he thanked her with joy. He approached, still holding the bag behind his back, and politely looking at the food, asked the seller 2 pieces of mantarai. At first, the man smiled at him and stated that he would now give them everything he had. However, recognizing who was facing him, he called them Gibba with jaws. Then he noted that he understood their order. They needed 2 mantas from Kim Yus. I asked them to leave the money on the board. The point was surprised when I thought about the word Gibba Jorns. Ifa got out of the basement of the mantra rays, left one to himself, and the other handed over to the main character, ordered to keep her mantra. He took another hot dish in his hand. His lips trembled as if they were about to crumble. The girl wondered what so upset him. The protagonist assured that everything is fine, only some things he does not understand. In response, he wondered what he was embarrassed, or maybe he did not like Kim Yusamit. After that, she bit a piece of Mathera and wondered if he really seemed strange that Gibajor eats Kim Yusami. The people of the forest region hunts the wild creature of the Giba and earns the craft coins. They are considered savages because of the distance of their lives from everything related to hunting, although, in fact, it is because of these hunters that others can feel safe. However, they perceived it differently. They only beware of the Gibidzurs. After finishing her story, she turned to a point. She asked the protagonist whether he liked these people, or did she just think? He was surprised by this issue. After graduating from his tirade, he replied that he did not like these people at all. Ifa smiled at him, noting that she could not tolerate the residents of the stone capital. Feelings seemed to be mutual. She confessed that she was tired of their endless conversations about money. They slowly moved towards the house. The girl wondered what Montas tasted with Kim Yusat, and he only swallowed saliva. After that, he clenched his hand into his fist and confidently stated that his cooking was far superior. Afa turned to him and appreciated his confidence. The girl agreed that she thought so, but did not have time to agree. Suddenly behind them sounded some sounds, and the man, turning, called to someone, asking what had happened to the person. Asuta turned and saw that he was standing in front of the same eldest son of a Dug, with whom he first met in the forest. He put his foot forward, leaned to the girl and ordered her to look at her feet. People began to gather around them. Someone wondered if he knew that it was forbidden to swear here. Another advised to call protection, their own. The girl lying on the floor tried to justify him. Aifa, watching what was happening, confessed that she is still young and inexperienced, so he usually responds to evil. She jumped to the nearest shop, grabbed a long tool and, apologizing to the owner, assured that she lent it only for a moment. Asura tried to call her name, but she did not even look back and only reported that their purchases were still in place. After that, she firmly headed to the Diga-san, turned to him, and waved the tool in front of his face. In all its form, seriousness was felt. From the impact, the cloak flew behind his back like wings. She abandoned her husband that his presence was annoying her eyes. At the end of the instrument, a small hook was visible, just near the body of Digi Sangs. He froze in place and, looking at her hard, asked what she thought. She also replied that if he did not want to get wounded, he was better off from her path. More and more people were gathering around them. Asuta was worried about the fate of AI-50, and he could not hide his excitement. Suddenly, a man with a hidden hooded face, noting that this woman was truly impressive. Suddenly, one of the guards ran to them and shouted loudly, asking what they were doing here. One of the eyewitnesses noted that the security was finally appeared. The son of Dega finally realized that he could seek help, so he turned to the man and asked him to save him. He assured that Ifa attacked him for no reason, but the woman only silently watched him, clapping her eyes. Asuta, meanwhile, was outraged loudly by such behavior. The guard looked at them, smiled, and suddenly realized that the Perlises were standing before him. The girl in response also looked at him closely. The man addressed A. Fei, informed that he had to talk to her, so he asked her to follow him. She handed over the tool to the owner. He noted that he was a witness of everything, from very beginning to end. Asura tried to explain that the guilt was not on her. An unfamiliar man with hair to the shoulders of wheat came to him. A wide smile blossomed on her face. He said that at first Degasun pushed the girl, and when he was about to reproach her for not apologizing, the Aif immediately intervened and stopped him. The girl just agreed with this story. Listening to this, the guard came to the conclusion that no fight had happened. Then he appealed to the passers-by to disperse. The owner of the store did not take the tool, so the Aifa was approaching herself and put it, saying that she was returning the thing. He only exclaimed when the court called her. The latter ran to her and asked the man who stood up for them. She confirmed that he should really thank. Suddenly, this man appeared in front of them, still smiling. He noted that he did not need gratitude. Asuta was very surprised that he managed to come so close. Afa, looking at him, tried to deny him, but he only said that he had to hurry. He still had urgent cases. He raised his right hand and left leg, as if preparing for running, and still smiling widely, thanked for the interesting sight. Then he turned and went away. It seemed as if the air around him was glowing. A.F. and Asuta spent his eyes, and without understanding what happened. The girl only smiled cunningly, and noted that he said goodbye to them very elegantly. Subsequently, they went home. The girl turned to the main character, noting that today he looks tired, and indeed he felt extremely exhausted. In response, the guy said it was all because of a shaky suspension bridge. Aifa overtook him a little and suggested to cook dinner faster to have time to rest. Approaching closer to the house, she noticed that someone was standing next to him. She wondered if guests had come to them. Gazlan, Rutum, and Asuta stood near the house. He noted that they were waiting for them, and then added that he had a request to the house of F.A. Goslan and Asuta remained near their home, watching the events. Aifa and the main character were also frozen in place, without dare to move. Only the main character, overflowing with surprise, asked the question. He clarified whether they were newlyweds from the home of Rutum, but no one answered his question. The girl wondered what business they came with. The man replied that they appeared. Together, they went to the house and sat down each other just on the floor. Gazlones noted that they were extremely impressed with their culinary skills on a wedding holiday. He closed his eyes and said that he was sincerely asking them to be the guards of the hearth, and during the wedding itself, Asuta engulfed excitement. It seemed to him that he was really waiting for it. Gazlan explained that about 100 guests were expecting a feast, and apologized for asking for so unexpectedly. He asked if they agree with his proposal. The protagonist, covered with excitement, clung to the edge of his pants and squeezed them in his hand. Asuta thought that he was really recognized as a cook. Aifa looked at him carefully. He confessed that of course he was glad of such trust, and he hesitated whether he should participate in such an important ceremony, because he had never prepared for hundreds of people. But he asked them for a few days for preparation. In addition, he noted that he wanted to make sure whether they can fully meet their expectations. So I decided to find out what products and where to cook. Gazan and Asuta looked at, and then expressed their hope that he would agree to their proposal, and then said goodbye to him. Asud stood on the doorstep of the house, looking at the guests who were already moving away. The thoughts of the moment, he said, about the space of the kitchen, about the amount of food that would be needed, and that it is likely not to do without helpers, raged in his head. At that moment, he was called by the IHEP. She told him very quietly that she was proud of him. Silence prevailed around, but the main character still asked if she said something, and then apologized and explained that he had not heard anything. Aifa she turned to him, noting that he took on too much alone. She wondered whether he thought about asking her more often for help. Asuta noted that she has something from the evil person, and often she seeks to take everything. She asked her dissatisfied, but when she did it, he replied, "For example, right now." And he added that she seems to be trying to say something else. The protagonist smiled and noted that he was only thanks to her. She accepted him without knowing or understanding anything. Aifa. She was confused by the words heard, and a blush broke out on her cheeks. In order to hide her embarrassment, she turned away and noted that he had gained recognition on his own. He apologized again and explained that he did not hear her words. She then replied that people appreciate his culinary arts much more than himself. Her face suddenly became serious. She reached forward and told the protagonist to trust herself. Asuta turned to her, looked in the eye, smiled, and thanked. In response, she also looked in his eyes. In the end, they are located on the floor to discuss the future holiday. The protagonist noted that when you prepare for 100 people, you should have a list with all the necessary products and their quantities. You can find anything in the market. He raised his first product and asked the girl if he suits. She replied she didn't know. Then he showed her the next one, and again heard the same answer. When he was about to demonstrate another, the girl ahead of him, noting that she would not know this time. The protagonist mentioned that once, at their first meeting, Aifa did not understand what a delicious food was. Suddenly, he remembered that Remy movement told him the dish was delicious, and at the same time she knew what it was. He voiced another opinion. Rinner movement said the same in the collar. He stood sharply, clenched his fist, and confidently stated that the answer to his question was undoubtedly in the house. The Aifa calmly agreed with him, noting that in their position they can only count on the house. At heart, he felt even ashamed because she made his decision. The girl reported that she was going to go to ask for permission for a visit, and he also expressed his desire to go with her. On this, the main character noted that without the housewife, he would have nothing to do. Subsequently, they reached the home of the RJ family. They met them and asked why they came to discuss the possibility of holding a wedding in them, contacting Shin. She explained that her father had already told her everything. Then the girl turned to the Asat, asking if he would become a housekeeper for her. Aifa and the main character stopped in front of the girl, focusing on her. It was at this point that she thought about the permission, while the guy, noticeably nervous, confessed that he had not yet made the final decision. Asuta noted the Rhine that if the holiday is at home, then he will be preparing there. She undoubtedly agreed with this proposal. He then asked if they recalled that they had 4 fireplaces, and whether they were enough to prepare meals for hundreds of people. He explained that there will be 4 cauldrons for such a number of guests, for giba, poitin, Aryan soup, and fried meat. He thought, thanks to only one dish, he probably would be able to feed 100 people. That is why he turned the cloak. Asuta seemed to be a really important holiday. He reminded her the moment they stood together in the pantry, and she advised him to buy products. She noted that he had good memory. The protagonist explained that he had one request. He wanted to ask women about their home. He rapidly broke into the room where women from the Roof family were, and asked them. He was interested in what products are most commonly used by experienced housewives to store in the fire, and what ways they are considered to be the best. Remy and Vena looked at him. The first named him in the name, and the second, without understanding the question, asked again. Aifa quietly noticed him that if they immediately showed him how to use it, then why did the two order a feast at all? He calmly answered that he was thinking about dishes. This time he has little, so he is looking for at least some tips. Asuti seemed to be unlikely to understand him if he said that he did not understand anything in their world. The Rhina hurried to help and wondered if they could take care of him, because they were still preparing for him. He supported her request and addressed them with his own request. One of the girls, hearing that the Rhine asked for it, agreed to help. The girl introduced herself, saying that her name was Guido. She confessed that she was not very aware of cooking, but she is most fond of vegetables. Remy noted that he often adds to the dish chat. With it, the food becomes especially juicy and delicious. Vina joined the conversation, noting that she likes one type of tino. It resembles the leaves. If you add it to the dish, everything becomes tender and soft. Then one of the pursuits asked the Rhina that she liked, and added that he had heard about her spices. However, now he said, he would be glad of any product. She understood it, raised the subject, and noted that she prefers tarap. Seeing this thing, he remembered how they purchased a similar one in a city named Gitch. It looks like a large grain. Reina kept the fruit in one hand and noted that the raw it could be fresh. However, it is only worth cooking, and there is a sweet-sour taste that she really likes. Reflecting on it, he came to the conclusion that this product is reminiscent of a tomato to some extent. Together with Ayafoy and Raymond, they approached the drawer in the pantry, where they asked the girl to allow them to look around. In response, she promised to visit her father and find out if he would allow a few more hearts. Girls from the Ryu family assured that they can cook vegetables that can be purchased in the city, but with mushrooms cannot be able to help, because they are not hunters. He replied that he understood everything. Asuta went outside with Alifoy. Looking at him, he noted that the sun is already coming, so the men would return soon, and he will talk to them. Then the girl asked what to do. She assured that she was able to hunt, and wondered if he needed help. At this point, Rainina went out and reported that the men seemed to be returning. The latter stood by the group near the house. Anxiety was read on their faces. They spoke hard about something, and the characters immediately felt something was wrong. Asuta wondered why the smell of iron is so clearly heard in the air. He was joined by Kia Lisa, and in his own way, said that in addition to the beast, she also felt human blood here. The protagonist saw a man with white hair whose figure was all filled with blood. Stunned by this scene, he inadvertently thought about human blood. He watched this in the suit and could not understand what was happening. Men reported that they would take the wounded inside, which he agreed, and advised to put it under the tree. Considering the found, the protagonist realized that he was a redness in front of him. He thought about his condition. Blood was on his head. He sat under a tree with his eyes closed and moaning quietly. Afa put her hand on his shoulder and assured that everything would be fine. A guy with long black hair ran up to the victim. He anxiously called him by his name and asked if he was in goodness. Ruto opened his eyes and turned to the tire. At first he closed his eyes as if he had lost consciousness again, and then he sharply opened them, as if not stifling what happened. Rutudo suddenly dropped on his knees and assured that he just hit his head a little, so everything was fine with him. After that, he wondered what happened to Shinra's father. He replied that his father could no longer be a hunter. In fact, he has not even come to his senses. It is said that Hiba has caused him these injuries. However, it was for this reason that Ruto began to talk about what could happen in the future. However, the tire himself acknowledged that his home would simply disappear. Now only he is one in the whole family to hunt, but he cannot feed 5 on his own. After that, he apologized to him for having to tell it all. After listening to all this, Asut asked if these people had failed. The Afa replied that this time they seemed to be able to return only with the wounded. Here, the protagonist thought that the girl was hunting for the Giba on her own all this time. Earlier, he perceived it as a common matter. She went hunting, returned from him, and he has long been accustomed to her behavior. But only now he was amazed at how she was always able to return herself and intact. He returned to the girl, intending to talk to her about hunting customs, but suddenly another guy turned to her. Immediately recognized the same one who recently talked to Rudo. Their views met. After that, Ru's tire returned to A Fei and wondered if she was always hunting alone. The girl nodded, confirming it, and asked what was the matter. He looked at her with special seriousness, and asked him to teach him the art of victims of hunting. Both went up and met, looking at each other. After his words, both the If and the main character thought about the sacrifices on the hunt. She confessed that she did not know such a person, and wondered if Tom should take care of the wounded. Hearing this, Chin began to be nervous, and noted that she hunts alone. Therefore he must understand him. He will have to defend his family himself. At that moment, only one thing was interested in Asuta. What is sacrificial hunting? The Afa, calmly staring at the guy, noted that he was better not to waste words. Shinra shuddered, not hoping to hear such words from her, and then turned and went away. The girl did not even look in his direction. The protagonist, witnessing this scene, felt that the girl turned away from him as sharply as during their first meeting. She told him that today it is not necessary to talk about preparation for the holiday. It will be discussed tomorrow. He replied to this that he could not think of another right now. He does not come from his thoughts. Then he noticed that the wounded Rudo was going alone. He became wondering where he went alone. Returning to the girl, he asked to wait a little, explaining that he should follow him. She agreed. Asura approached the guy, put his palm on his shoulder to support, and wondered why he was in the blood and how he felt in general. He looked at Asura in surprise, named him by his name, and explained that he was only a little hiding his head. It was not his blood. Rudolph said he was going to wash near the water, so he asked him to spend it there. The protagonist smiled and noted that last time he was Rudolph who was killed, and now everything is the other way around. The young man was surprised that he remembered it. They reached the reservoir. Rutu was wash his face, and then turned his head in different directions to dry his hair and skin on his face. The man reported that now he feels much better, so he will be able to get home on his own, and thanked the protagonist. Asuta jokingly replied that there was nothing special about it. Meanwhile, until IPH was around, he thought that a successful moment was asked. The protagonist quietly addressed Arudo and asked if he was familiar with the way of hunting called the sacrifice. Arudo, struck by Herd, only looked at him and asked again. Rudrud warned him not to flee and wondered what he was going to do when everything turned out to be. In response, Asuta just waved, noting that he was not his business, and then the guy understood everything. He asked the protagonist, who actually said Shinra about it. He just lowered his gaze to the floor and was unable to find words for answer. Then he wondered if the head of the house did not really know it, and then noted that those who hunt this way collect sweet incense that attract jive. Asuti mentioned the same sweet aroma that he felt during their first meeting. Rututu noted that it was just an assumption. The protagonist emotionally asked him to tell in more detail. He explained that the Afa stubbornly denied everything, claimed that she knew nothing, and talked from Shinra as if he wanted to get rid of her as soon as possible. Rudo confessed that he did not really understand the victim. It was a very ancient custom. The hunter specifically catches the smells that attract a giba. He himself becomes a kind of ghost, and the lower, which is inspired by the anticipation, becomes this impatient Shiba for himself. This is such a hunting tradition. The main character looked away, and, noticeably nervous, noted that it was dangerous. In response, Rudo was in a hurry to assure, "It is not necessary to take it wrong. They, hunters, hunt pride, protecting their families. Therefore, he asked not to worry about the hunter who tries to protect his family. On the contrary, you should be proud of it, even if it uses sacrificial hunting." He immediately mentioned the words of Dandarar that women are not allowed to hunt, so they were handed over amulets, the fact that tender meat is poison for it. And all this, emphasized him, is done for the sake of the family. After that, he mentioned that Gazlan, along with the bride, really turned to him for help. He apologized to the Eagle Rue, confessed that he escaped, and asked to try to go himself. In response, he assured that everything was fine with him. They say, the suit was not damaged, and Suta suddenly rushed to run. Now he seems to have realized for the first time what hunting was. The main character rushed to the IPI. She called him loudly, asking why he did not return for so long, but he walked past, thanked her for his efforts not to upset him, and answered that he would go to talk to her men. The girl only turned and gained his gaze. In her eyes a misunderstanding was read. In the meantime he thought that it was men who should be at such a height. Opening the door, he entered the room and stopped on the doorstep. The head of the Dendaru family turned to him, but never realized what was happening. He asked the protagonist why he appeared here without warning, because it was in this ward that assisted the wounded. On these words, the main character just returned to him calmly. After that, he sank to the way before them and confessed that he understands. Now, in such difficult times, it is not necessary to address something, but despite this cannot but voice his request. However, Dandus noted that if he understood everything, he should leave the house quickly. But the guest worshipped deeply and not let him agree, asked that they could give him 30 heads of the Giba for the wedding feast of Gazlan Rotim and his bride. Silence prevailed in the hall. It seemed to him that he was refused. Raising his head, he met the look of the Shinju, in which he was reading, as if it were written on his face. The relative was offended, and he was just talking about it. However, this was not surprising. Suddenly, someone grabbed Shunshin to the edge of the cloak and strongly pulled him. Feeling it, the guy turned and saw his father. The head of the man, as well as half of the face, were rewinded with bandages. Nevertheless, he smiled and noted that hunting for others was the true pride of the hunter. Even if the day comes when he can no longer hunt, let his son never reject this pride. Surprised, Eschin called him in name. He only sighed and noted that if he had to hunt, then the wedding feast of Rutum will need help. All men in the house began to whisper, calling his name and whispering that he was in trouble. Dandaru only summed up. The decision was already made. The man continued, noting that the people of Rugaus promised to prepare the right amount of mascara. Suddenly Asuta stood up and smiled, giving thanks to all present. It seemed to him that now he finally realized that it was the residents of Prochlesia who considered the most valuable in life. This is the close connection in their family. He solemnly promised to arrange a luxurious wedding, and I thought, among other things, he did it for the sake of those who chose it. At this moment, Chin put his palm in his father's hand. Have passed a few days. Asuta asked the men whether they finished drain the blood and disassemble the carcass. Those assured that they had executed his assignment, it was easy. Meanwhile, the people of Ryu caught 30 gibs. However, there was one person who opposed such actions. However, everything was settled in a few words. It was Donda. He explained that if someone in his family is liked, then he has nothing. Asuta put a large deep bowl on the table, and noted that now they had to wait for the vegetables that women should bring. At that moment, Remy ran to him, shouting his name loudly. Smiling, the boy asked to see what he had. She returned and gestured with a gesture standing behind. She explained that they went to the city for his products. The girl, holding the packages in her hands, looked down, as if asking another girl to help. He laid out purchased products on plates, mentally noting that about 100 people gathered here, and it was really great. After that, the man returned to the girls and sincerely asked them to help manage everything before the holiday. Remy approached him and confessed that she had never used a parade before. She wondered what he was going to do with so many. He replied to this that he had just invented a new menu. Ifa intervened with their conversation and asked what was happening here, whether men were discussing something interesting. At this point, one of the Sweetens noticed that the Ifa was considering something carefully. He asked what happened. Without rotation, she replied that there were people from the song. I asked them what they were doing here. Hearing this name, the protagonist thought for a moment and remembered the unpleasant person who held a jar with a drink. He immediately approached Ifa and asked if these people were the same. They were not invited here. So why did they actually come? Not to start a fight. Elisa replied that she didn't know anything about it. She was going to go and see what was happening and asked him to stay still. He escaped her look, without understanding the situation. Men threw carcasses on the floor. They stated that they brought the family a festive gift, to which Donaru again asked them. He looked at the gift and was informed annoyed whether it could really be called a gift. The son of Degas explained that everything happened too fast, so it was not possible to prepare a gift better. The Pakar noted that no one invited them here in general. He pointed to the animal and ordered to get rid of this gift immediately, because, in his opinion, such a monster could not be left here. Then Donna, with a strict look, made guests and advised them to show courtesy and return to where they came from, until his anger reached the limit. The Daij was surprised in such words and wondered whether Rua was hostile to their home. In response, Dad Ru explained that they only want to prepare for the wedding quietly, and their neighbors interfere with it. Two families came together opposite each other. The Song family members looked quite calm, even smiling. Instead, the Ru family was openly dissatisfied. Afa has already been going to approach and find out what happened, and Asura ahead of her. The protagonist resolutely went forward, and without even looking at the girl, calmly walked past her in the direction of men who had a conversation. He heard the Diga mockingly sang, causing that all this fuss came only because of a festive dinner, which they did not even care for. In response, Asuta asked him whether they really intend to spoil everything here. He looked around and carefully, with a note of the question in his gaze, looked at him. The protagonist wondered if he really did it. In response, the stranger himself asked what would happen if he was, and in general, who he was. It seemed as if the hero's face was familiar with him, though he could not remember where he had seen him before. Masuda came closer, grabbed him for his clothes and asked if they were aware that they had done. They were also called precursors. The son of Degas ordered him to silence, after which he struck him in his face. From this, the main character flew away. He collided with an inverted table and glowed directly on the floor. Asuta was thought. People from the Song family knocked down meat that men from the tribe of Ryu were preparing for the holiday table with such efforts. He rose, and barely holding on his feet returned to the men. The main character again grabbed Digas's clothes. With anger in his eyes, he ordered to apologize to the Ryu family. In response, the Ast was hit for the second time. This time in the stomach. He began to fall to the ground. The Ifa exclaimed his name and rushed to meet the fall. However, Donaru suddenly took him by his shoulders. The main character looked at him in surprise. But his father, not watching his eyes, watched the family of songs. He sharply pushed Asuta and ordered to go back. Asuta was still surprised because of the unclear behavior of the head of the family. The son of Dega believed that the protagonist was not the best person, and he should apologize. Donaru replied that he was only a guest in their home. Digger noted with indignation that in this case it is necessary to apologize. But the head of the Song family turned to him in his name, and this gesture stopped him. After that, he stated that if he continues to bother him with his rudeness, he would take it as a declaration of war against the House of Ryu. He further wondered if the interlocutor understood, putting in his words a threat that the Song had frozen with fear. The second man only hesitantly said his name, as if not believing heard. Diggit turned and ordered Mikuli to follow him, taking with him a gibu, which he brought. Mikula said with dissatisfaction that he had already suffered a lot, carrying it so far. He may have indeed thrown the carcass on his shoulders and followed the son of the Dais. He, meanwhile, was extremely annoyed. At the same moment, AFAA. He turned and ran towards Aswa. She rushed home and saw that everything was fine. He was already washing dishes. Passing one of the family members of a family wrapped in a fabric, he noted that you need to cut a little, then everything will be fine. In response, he was asked if it would not work out. The Ifa looked at it in surprise. Someone asked Asuta the question of what to do with this product, and he assured, "Everything is fine. You can use." The protagonist smiled and assured that if something suddenly reached, the dish would change a little. He will definitely invent something new and will not allow their efforts to be in vain. While Aifa looked at Asuta, Donaru turned to her. He talked about her firefighter, and she immediately asked what had happened. Donna suggested that he may have been injured somewhere. The girl was instantly concerned. She asked Donis if he really felt something when he caught him. He replied that he may have shifted slightly through his leg or through his shoulder. He suggested looking at him from his back. Afa was upset and noted that it was her guilt. However, Donna began to deny her guilt and claimed that if Degasun had seen her, everything would have worsened. After all, she has not found a common language with a tsunami, so it was even good that she didn't come closer. He further added that Sutra is just a stranger among them, who does not understand the true weight of the wedding in their lives, does not realize what they expect from him, and does not even try to stay away. However, he believes, one day he will become a good keeper of the hearth. The Aifa looked at the protagonist and apologized to him for having mastered herself too late. She wondered if he could somehow help, to which he answered that she should have removed the wool of the giba left here. Vegetables lay on the table in front of them. Asutan turned to the girls and said they were starting to cook. This time, he wants to prepare a new dish with them. The girls listened carefully to him. He said that they used to always prepare giba soup with eaten. But from now on, they decided to add slightly toasted vegetables and reduce the amount of fried meat. Tarapa took, he smiled, and noted that he wanted to prepare a new soup from this vegetable. The Rhina asked about it again, full of expectations, and Gavito noted that her face was glowing with joy. Preparation for the festive feast is slow. The logs of the young grass were erected from the logs. Finally, a wedding feast begins. A plate of hot soup was placed on the table. One of the waiters in a strict suit asked them to pay attention to this dish from the new wedding menu. Vinru wondered whether the Giba had prepared this red dish. Reina, in a sniff, noted that this smell seems familiar to her. She was glad, assuming that the main ingredient of soup is tarup. Hearing this, the woman smiled and assured that the guess was quite accurate. He immediately remembered how she told about the taste of that vegetable dish, and when he heard it from Ranjin, he realized tarapo, something like a tomato, which resembles the shape of cabbage. He spreads all this, and from the rest of the fruit came out a surprisingly delicious tomato soup. Because it is a wedding, the dishes should be bright and colorful. But on the table some of them remained white and others brown. The main character suggested that the guests get acquainted with the dishes, and they agreed. While he served the table, Dan Rudum noted that he was waiting for his fried meat. The owner promised to bring him a portion. He handed Jibar plate and reported that the dish was called the soup Tara, hoping that she would like it. She was charming, they say. Even her teeth will cope with the Tarab Arabai. Meanwhile, F.A. he called him, saying that everything began. He turned and saw Gazlan with his bride. Both had gorgeous white robes, from which the beauty took a breath. He decided that everything was illuminated at the same time by the western sun, and the flames of the campfire, and said aloud that he had never seen such a charming picture even in Japan. There was some real witchcraft in all this. Asuta flicked, crossed his hands on his chest, and apologized to his father and friends for seeming to bring their death a little benefit. The Ifa wondered what he was carrying with him. In response, Asuta showed his finger to the object and pointed to her look more closely. Loyal stood nearby, forming a semicircle with others. She announced that the rite would be over soon, and they would go ahead of all again. The protagonist stood with his eyes wide open, looking at the bride and groom who walked past him. They smiled extremely friendly, and he answered them with the same warm smile. It seemed to him that it would be enough for the guests to like his feast. But suddenly, the fate brought him out of the idea. He was scared. She reported that the festive meal had already begun, so it is time to go. Then he was uncertain about whether she would go. The girl looked at him seriously, and then said she had to dress, so she asks him to go. He looked at her in surprise and asked. In his thoughts, he tried to understand what exactly means her need to change his clothes. She became embarrassed and began to insist in a high voice that he was in a hurry for the holiday. Embarrassed by her tone, he agreed, nodded nervously and turned to leave. Looking around, he was surprised to realize that he did not see any other woman nearby. At this point, Dan Rutum turned to him. The man reached out a plate and ordered Asuta to put meat on her. Taking the plate in his hands, Asuta thought that this is how he imagined it, and asked how many pieces of meat should be brought. However, the interlocutor interrupted him and thanked him immediately. The head of the Rutma family looked around and noted that he had arranged a real gorgeous holiday. All members of the family sat around, happy to taste the dishes that the main character prepared. He only confirmed the validity of his words. After that, he confessed that he arranged such a gorgeous guest with the help of other people. Dan Rutum smiled at him, muttered the words of consent, and then added that he would take 5 pieces of meat in this case. Asuta roasted the meat, transferred it to a plate, and reported that 5 pieces had come out. Suddenly, a girl passed. He wondered if she seems to him. He froze, holding a plate in his hands, turned to the I and Fu named and wondered what had happened, because her hairstyle was surprisingly unusual. She was dressed in a suit that completely enlisted her, and was decorated with flowers. The hair fell on the shoulders. It also wrapped flowers, though not quite neat. She wondered what happened. Is she really a problem that she had her hair dissolved? He looked at her again, and the mouth, like the eyes, was widely revealed from what he saw. The man was in a hurry. He was in a hurry to assure that everything was fine, although he thought, there is a problem, and it is in her outfit. Aifa looked at his plate and wondered if his meat would be. Having realized that this is true, he suddenly turned and ran away. Sweet, meanwhile, thought that it usually has a wonderful look, and this outfit looks especially good though quite different. He approached Dan Ratoma and said he had brought the meat. Dan thanked him and then asked why women behave in a similar way. He was answered that women are very honored to dress so on the holiday, because men are a real pleasure for the eyes. Asuta turned to Dana, asking for this joy, and he confirmed her words. He explained that it is very important for their people to create a new family for this purpose. Already participating in such an event is true happiness. So she advised him not to hold back and enjoy the holiday. Many people gathered around the bonfire. Everyone sat in circles and treated with dishes prepared by the protagonist. Dan explained that this is how their wedding looks. In the morning, I, Fa, and Asuta gathered their things. The girl returned to him and said that she had already swore and could be returned home. Asuta nodded as a sign of consent, after which he almost lost his balance. She wondered whether it was worth asking for a path for the night, because they celebrated all night. However, he refused, explaining he was worried about their stocks, so it is better to go shopping. The Afa noted that it was in this matter that he shows amazing honesty. He asked again whether it was only about it. Then he added that Gazlan Rutim paid honestly. You need to take care of the girl's hearth, he said. She just smiled at these words. They went home. On the way, she wondered if he was really feeling well. He only asked her in surprise. AIFA explained that in order to get to the store, it would be necessary to cross the suspended bridge with which it did not have a relationship. Stopping before the crossing, he looked at the bridge with disappointment. At first, it seemed to him that he had forgotten this fact, and then remembered that there was another man on the bridge who was also trembling with fear. He turned, and only then did he recognize his acquaintance in him. His face seemed to him to his acquaintance as if he had seen this person before. At that moment, the man turned to them, and it was then that the board under his feet cracked, split in half. He began to fall, and Asuta healed fear for him. The man fell rapidly, but in the moment the fall he had time to grasp the rope of Mosat. He hanged in the air and exhaled with relief. The Afa warned him not to move. She was going to help. The man warned that she did not approach, otherwise he could break down. They got home for a while. The girl, along with the Asut, settled on the floor. Asut, meanwhile, reflected, as if in such a situation they did their senior. Before them sat the same man they met near the bridge. He was extremely excited and wondered what this blanket was made of. The pattern seemed too old, but the walls of the tree were fascinated by beauty. He did not wait for the answers. They just looked at him silently. Both Asuta and Ifa looked somewhat confused, watching the scene that opened before them. Both thought about how to act in such a situation. The protagonist mentioned that he did not listen to the man, and still rushed to him. Grabbing his hand, he began to pull him out of this pit. When they finally managed to help him, the guy grabbed his feet and thanked him, confessing that he was afraid to fall. The discord he took one hand behind his head. Aifa. She wondered why he was here at all. In response, the man winked with her and stated that he had come to study the inhabitants of the forest. Asut and the girl just surprised, without understanding his words. After taking the bags, they moved to the side of the house. The girl noted that she was still at home today. The protagonist agreed with this, and the unknown also supported her. The three of them walked the trail one by one. At some point, the IF turned to him and asked why he followed them. In response, he smiled, asked if she organized a blacksmith in the Genos, and added that she was also interested in him. She maliciously ordered him to disappear from her eyes. He looked at her calmly and quietly, assured that he understood everything. And in the end, this man was in their home. Asura wondered why he came. He explained that he came here to avoid her look he liked. Going to the fire, he asked if it was a fire. The protagonist approached him and explained that it was a kitchen. The stranger replied that he understood and wondered what was being prepared here. Smiling, the hero noted that most often they cook from the meat of the giba, and mentally imagined a delicious fried piece on a plate. The man, inspired, asked if this item was really made of giba mita, and then carefully asked if he was also allowed to do so. Afa, looking at him carefully, noted the question in response to which he answered a new question. Asuti became clear that the moment was tense. The girl ordered him to throw fried meat to a stranger, and he answered himself Kamua Isa, and explained that he was a defender. The protagonist wondered if he was a defender. The man confirmed it, and noted that his task was to protect important people while traveling. He had to hear that the Prisletzians came from the people who at one time fled from south to west. This is what caused him interest. You do not hear about people who have changed even your god every day. At this point, Asuta interrupted him, putting his nose on her head and announcing that she was taking. Feeling the smell of fried meat, someone approached and asked if it belongs to Jai. He noted that, being a man from the western capital, today has the first time to taste this culinary masterpiece. Asut took a ready, made piece of meat, put it on a plate and stretched it to the boy, warning that the dish was still hot and should cool slightly. He immediately settled on the floor and began to eat with genuine appetite. While he had lunch, the protagonist, along with Yofo, sat opposite and watched him carefully. It seemed to the girl that the residents of the stone capital were felt immediately before eating lips. Kamua seemed to be delighted. He noted that he first tasted such delicious meat and was sincerely moved. After that, he wondered if their family really had the exclusive right to prepare this dish. She started to get annoyed with his words. It was scared of Asuta. It seemed to him that the girl was really angry. She returned to him and asked his name again. She got up sharply and approached Kamva. After that, she noticed that he had not yet grasped all the charm of Gibami. Asuta, sitting behind, cast a curious look at her. The defender, with an extremely serious expression of the face, wondered what the peculiarity was. On this, Ifa just smiled a mysterious smile, and then she said that the real beauty lies in Hamburg. The protagonist only thought. He did not doubt what she would say. Kemua immediately wondered what it was. The girl, full of pride, suggested that he show him, and he decided that she just wanted cutlet. The protagonist roasted 3 cutlets in a frying pan. From time to time he looked at Aifu and Defender. The latter exactly told the girl about his life and how he decided to become a guardian of traders from the Genos. On the way, He looked into the village of Pranjans to find out if they would let them go. There he suddenly fell. The girl looked at him concentrated and seriously. She assured that she understands his words, but has no intention of being welcoming to stone people. Kamva replied that it was quite clear to him, because trust cannot be gained only in words. Meanwhile, Asuta approached them, carrying 2 plates of cutlets. He apologized to interrupt the conversation, but reported that the steps were ready. He covered it on the table and noted that there was no time left, so they only got a small serving and toasted arias for dinner. Kim Y exclaimed happily. He wondered which hamburger was offered to him, and heard in response that he was served on a wooden plate. He then asked where the fountain was, but received an unexpected answer. It is white flat bread. Then the Afa assured him that the words are superfluous. It is only necessary to taste, and everything would become clear. Asura, folding his palms together and smiling, wished everyone delicious. Kamva repeated this gesture and then took a spoon and decided to taste the first dish. The defender milked everything in the plate with the help of a spoon and immediately reached for a new portion. At the same time, a disgust was read on his face, as if the dish did not taste like. At this point, AI, FA and Astot was observed with fear. The man was sitting with his eyes wide, staring up. The girl addressed the protagonist with the question of what he did, but in response he was indignant how she could say that at all. He assured that he did nothing. Suddenly Kim was crying. Squeezing forced his whole body to tremble. Elisa and Asuta, who were sitting nearby, looked stunningly at him, unable to say a word. The defender slammed his fists on the floor, and without stopping, asked how such a delicate and delicious dish could come out of the snake meat. It does not fit in your head. Asutu and Ifu was caught by surprise. They froze in silence. Meanwhile, Kamva does not get tired of saying that he is a real gourmet of the capital stone, but he cannot understand how they managed to cook such delicious meat. Then he took the cake and baked a piece. Then in surprise he wondered, if it really is a purple, how can it be prepared from it? Asuta and Afa continued to look at him with disbelief. Calmly, he also met their views. After that he apologized, acknowledging that he was a little fascinated. Then he wondered if it was really their usual food in the forest. The girl replied she didn't know. She could only confidently say one thing: Asuta taught them. Meanwhile, Asuta himself noted the thought that the conversation suddenly went to him. Kamva immediately assured him that he was not an alien, although he noted that it was slightly different from them. While the defender turned away, he addressed the girl with the question of how to explain everything now. She replied that he should be said as she sees fit. Asuta was nervous. He began his story with the fact that he was born and raised in Japan, and once woke up and found himself in this forest. He thought about himself that at least the truth was telling the truth. Kamva asked him about Japan, and he confirmed it. Then the defender asked if he really moved here. However, the Afate interrupted him, reporting that she found out where Asud was from. She also wondered if she liked the dinner. Camelin looked away for a moment, and when he looked again, he had already smiled and assured that he was undoubtedly the taste of the dish prepared by the main character. After that, the Afa noted that they continued dinner, and later turned to Asura, noting that the cutlet remained little. It surprised him, because this time he prepared more. Then the defender wondered if they were still eaten. Subsequently, Kamva said goodbye to the owners, thanking them for their hospitality and for the opportunity to find out a lot about the surrounding forest. The girl said she was glad for him. The main character warned him to be careful on the bridge. He turned to say goodbye. Aifa, watching him, thought everything looked as if a hurricane had raced here. Asud agreed with her, and Kamo winked and shouted to try to open his shop in the genome. Kemva stood his back to the main character. He turned to him by his name, and Kemva, turning around, asked if he wanted to open a store in the stone capital. Having said it, he winked trickily. Asuta shuddered in his dream and suddenly woke up with a cry. Rising, he said quietly that it was only a dream. On his top of him, the Ayeshi was leaned and turned to him. She sat down, crossed her hands on her chest, and wondered if he could wake up quieter and calmer. He brushed his teeth, so he blurred that he was scared. The girl wondered if he dreamed of a suspension bridge, but he denied, noting that at that time they had not yet passed him. He told me that Kamva was persecuted in his dream. The Afa drew attention to his face, adding that she was really scaring. In response, Asuta asked what she was talking about. The girl noted that she still noticed the presence of thoughts about the stone capital. At the same time, she understood that Kamua does not leave him. He remembered how they talked about the And after her departure. One of the sutra noted that opening a store in the stone capital is almost like a joke. Hearing this, the girl wondered what was wrong here. He was surprised and asked her again. Then he added that last time they were there, she called this city a congregation of bad people. She denied it, that she did not say it literally. Then he asked her if she really didn't like the city. She replied that it was not quite so. She just didn't like the dead. Asuta was alarmed, and he asked if those killed had the money. She replied that she had already visited the stone capital. Afa explained that they had purchased these remedies for gibbling, and wondered if he remembered it. To what he, a little surprised, confirmed, yes, he remembers. She turned away and noted quietly that they could now exchange fare with them. But he asked what had happened. Aifa noted that if it can cook and sell them meat, then they will pay with it meat. Only when they eat his burgers will their balance be positive. Pasuda noted that he saw greed in her look, what she wondered when he had something with him. She added that the Jiba mint could bring prosperity to the forest region, and then fewer people will die of exhaustion, because they no longer have to collect enough fangs for Eaton and Arya. The main character shuddered, realizing how much she insisted. Then he apologized to her, adding that he wanted to hear the thoughts of other aliens. He later addressed others with the same question. Glizlan Rutim answered him the same, although the interlocutor noted that he would be called Gibiev after that in the stone capital. The Afa noted that he was stubborn, and then wondered if they would go to the city. He asked, to meet Kamva, and he added that Kamva promised to wait for him at the hotel if he got through the bridge whole. In the end, they reached the city. Asuta was surprised that they still managed to do it, and the girl said that once they had come, now he can explore the body of the pastor. He wondered that the local people have a variety of skin color, but their faces still read dissatisfaction. Some of the faces remained completely indifferent. Asuta wondered if he could sell the meat dishes. Then he remembered. They say that the opposite of compassion is indifference. After all, if there is no store near the forest, it can be a sign of indifference. But at that moment, the Afa interrupted him, saying that it is enough. The protagonist did not have time to break away from his own thoughts, so he asked if she really was talking about the shot. In response, she wondered in surprise what he was talking about. She brought him to the building and explained that Kamua stopped in mind. The place was called Kamua's Fairy Tale. As he began to get nervous, he immediately receded, turning over his shoulder and asking if he could home. But the Afa was decisively refused. She reported that they had already got places. If returned, it will only be a waste of time. He tried to express his dissatisfaction, but she insisted. The decision should be made here and now. The main character opened the door of the hotel. He was met by a fair-haired guy who wondered, or is he, his name Asuta. He answered it in the affirmative, and then asked the boy's name. The man looked carefully at him and apologized uncertainly. The guy called Kamua's student. The seeker wondered who he could be, and he confessed to him that he was sorry for him. The guy asked, but in response he heard only that nothing was said. Brett brought them to the stairs, informed that the defender was on the second floor, and asked if they wanted to climb with him. Asura agreed to it, and then the guy shouted Kemve, announcing that he had come to the guest. The student sighed heavily and reported that guests from the forest had come to him. He then said he would take them to his room, then turned to everyone by name. The crown went smiling and noted that he was probably sleeping now. Asura only wondered whether they would gather him to wake him up, but the Aphaf was pushing him in his back, and all the time insisted that he was going on. The guy opened the door to his room, called the owner by name, and reported that he had come to him. Inside, on the table, lay the lower part of the male body. Seeing this, Asut shuddered and muttered something inaudible, convinced that he was no longer alive. The Aphit, however, shrugged and noticed that such a pose for sleep is just disgusting. The river shook and ordered him to wake up, because guests came from the forest and called on to master himself. The main character inadvertently wondered if he would have the strength to come together with his thoughts. Then Kamua moved and asked if he had come to him and Elisa. After that, he threw his head back and breathed the air deeply. The crown grabbed his hands and began to pull, reproaching that he did not lie out of work. They say the guests were in front of him. The main character looked at the girl and, with hope, met her gaze, asked if they could go home. In a few moments, he heard the camera sounding him. Turning sharply, he urged everyone to start discussing the case immediately. Subsequently, Asuta met with Kamua. He wondered if their conversation was business in nature, and whether Astute came to talk about opening a shop in the genome. Kamua added that in order to start trade, you need to pay the appropriate contribution. In 10 days, he has to pay with Kim Yusa meat, about as many as 10 mant. In addition, he is also departing a tenth of net profit. He wondered if this agreement was beneficial for him, and then Asuta thought about the manters made from this meat. Camo wondered if he had once tasted this dish. The protagonist replied that it happened only once. The man noted that the dish is really tasty, and the shops can be found everywhere. He noted that he really likes a manta from Kimus, because it is the most popular dish in the city. I turned to Asuti, asking him his opinion on this. Without waiting for the answer, Kemva noted that his ability to cook a giba could be compared with them, and wondered if he managed to persuade the interlocutor. The protagonist replied that he was not sure, because he does not know if there will be people who are ready to buy a giba meat. The defender lifted a compressed fist and assured that as a graduate gourmet could guarantee, his giba dishes are really incredible. Asuta looked at him and wondered if he was really talking seriously. However, remembering his reaction to the dish that he prepared, Asuta was convinced. The guy approached him and asked if he was all right. However, the protagonist did not answer, immersed in thought. It seemed to him that he had once heard similar words of Kamva. Suddenly he turned to AAA, and he reported that he wanted to talk, warning, another stranger will join them. After that, he wondered if she would not be against. The girl replied that she did not bother her, and noted that he needed time to think. After a while, they reached Dan Rutham's home. He sat on the floor, crossing his hands on his chest, and listened carefully. He reported that the dinner would be, and wondered what reason he decided to turn to him. Acid replied to this that he would like to hear his opinion. But the head of the family again repeated that dinner was about to begin. Dan was delighted and concluded that the protagonist appeared precisely for him to treat him with his new fried meat. Along with him sat Asura, full of surprise. The head of the Rudama family looked at him with such devotion and expectation that the protagonist could not refuse him. He answered the question in the affirmative. Subsequently, he put plates with a freshly prepared dish. Dan Rutam looked satisfied and noted that it was a new dish. But Asuta denied it. It was the same, a well-known dish. After that, everyone wished each other delicious and plunged into a silent meal. Watching this scene, he tried to remember why he found himself here. Aifa, who was sitting nearby, grabbed his clothes and pulled it lightly, trying to draw attention. Returning to her, he immediately realized that she was angry. Goslan appealed to Asuti, reporting that he had come to raise his new question and share his thoughts. Asuta replied that this time I would also like to hear Dana Rutam. Listening to the end, the elder stated that to cook the meat of the hazel and sell it in the city, the same as selling horns or fangs there. He does not encroach on the affection of the forest and does not violate any ban. At the same time, he confessed that he was not sure whether someone would want to eat this meat at all. Dan turned to him in his name and, continuing to eat, exclaimed that he could not think who would not love such a dish. He seemed to not understand what the language was talking about. Gazlan noted that in his opinion, this case should be discussed within the House of FA. And now it is very late, so he will take care of cooking a place to sleep for them. They were brought to a room where only one mattress lay on the floor. They were informed that they would spend this night here. Asutu was surprised that there was only one bed in the room. The girl who brought them to the apartment wondered if they were confused that the room is the same, because they still live under one roof. Aifa thanked her for the hospitable reception of their unexpected visit, to which the hostess replied that they should not be thanked. Let them rest, and do not hurry to go. The girl came to the carpet, sat down to touch the pile, and noticed that this is the best. Soft, not at home. The Aifa turned to Asuta and invited him to enter, adding that he likes soft. He remained on the doorstep, covered with embarrassment. He looked away and wondered if it was possible to ask another blanket here, which the girl was dissatisfied with. She noted that she knew about his sympathy for the bed, but since they are staying, there is no need to ask permission. In response, he tried to explain that everything was not true. The Aifa dropped his knees in front of him, spread his hair, and calling him to the room, waited for agreement. As a result, they lay near one rug. Asuta lay with his back to the girl and felt she was quite close. He was shy until she looked at him. She came closer and said his name loudly. Surprised, he asked what she wanted from him. The Aifa wondered if it was true that he had already decided everything. In her words, he asked in surprise. Then she explained what was meant to open a shop in the genome. He returned to the faster and noted that there was no kitchen utensil on the bench. What is frankly not enough. She looked into his eyes and wondered what would be next. He replied to this that it was not only his problem, he lacks money, and without solving them it is impossible to move on. Aifa turned and said quietly, which allowed him to act from the beginning. Caused by this confession, Asuta widened his eyes in surprise and continued to look at her. She noted that he probably didn't even notice. All his questions concerned only the reasons why the store should not be opened. So, at heart, he really wants to open his own business. The main character looked at her with distrust. The Aifa turned to him and noted that she would like to ask a question. They continued to lie opposite, not giving away from each other. Then she reached out to him. After that, she wondered if he would allow her, as a member of her family, to help him. Having said this, she easily touched her hair. His heart was killed faster than she had held her hand on his hair. At that moment, he remembered what she called herself part of their family. She even gently stroked him, smiling especially gently. But he took her hand to stop these movements. The main character carefully examined every part of her body, and then raised her eyes to his face. The hero's heart was suddenly faster. Continuing to keep her hand in his hand, he gently laid the other on her shoulder and said her name quietly. For a while, Asuta left the guest room and returned to the creature again, breathing loudly. He clenched his fists in front of him and firmly stated that everything. She lay on the mattress, turned to the side and wondered what it was over. The protagonist turned to her and, smiling, reported that he decided to open a shop. The girl even sat on the mattress, noting that she understands his choice. Then she wondered if he really was going to Kamuyas now. And from this mention of Asuta, a nerve yeast was pushed, because the memories of him were unpleasant. Subsequently, they left the Rutima house. On the way, Ife, believing that they were heading to the city, noted that the city is in a different direction. The protagonist replied that he just confused the way. So he suggested returning home and deciding what to buy. Finally, they got home. The guy was already going to break into stocks and think that a new one can be cooked with jiba. How at this moment he had to offer one of his ideas. However, Aifa interrupted him, suddenly talking about Hamburg. He looked at her and asked what she was in mind. In response, she firmly crossed her hands on her chest and firmly said about Hamburg. The protagonist thought about her words. It surprised him. Asuta tried to translate the conversation from hamburger, but the girl interrupted him, rejecting all his merits and returning to the conversation about hamburger again. The protagonist realized that arguing with her was in vain, so he just agreed. Subsequently, he roasted several cutlets in a frying pan. The Aifa was looking forward, but at the same time looked quite satisfied. She noted that this time the dish turned out to be smaller, and wondered if she could already taste. Asuta replied to this that you can already eat. She gladly replied that he would bring the spoons then, and the hero stopped her, explaining that as the owner of a street shop, she could not simply give each client a plate with a spoon. Stunned, she asked him what to do in such a situation. Asuta only advised her to eat her hands. She reached out her hand forward, and then turned her gaze to the cutlets. She sharply grabbed one of the cutlets with her hand, but found it hot, so it was uncomfortable to keep it. The cutlet slipped and fell, and the Aifa shouted that she had baked. Asuta looked at it with some resolution, thinking that otherwise he could not be. He asked if it was still difficult to eat with her hands, but she shook her head. The Aina immediately grabbed the cutlet with her hand and instantly lifted her mouth. The dish was still steaming, so she could not bite. She just exclaimed that he was hot and that he was ready for a long time. The protagonist noticed only one thing. All the juice from the cutlets is already leaked. She turned away from him. Then he approached her from behind and noted that the hamburgers were still not suitable for sale in the store. She agreed with him, at the same time screaming and feeling her hands and clothes sticking from meat juice. Asuta noted that this is the value of kimsamanth, because they are easy to eat. So he suggested that the cutlets wrap in a time. Aifa looked at him in surprise, asking if he did it intentionally. The main character did not understand her words and asked. In response, she noted that she did not say anything like this, and added that she would now be tidy. When the girl returned, he stretched her cutlet wrapped in a napkin and suggested trying. She did not hesitate, took the yeast, and immediately bitten a piece. Asuta asked her impressions of the dish. She thought and replied that the juice does not flow from it. It is good, but the ten has too expressive taste. She likes to eat one hamburger, and she does not want to eat the rest of 10. The protagonist thanked her for the response, but in response he heard that she did not need gratitude. He was struck by her frank, almost icy sincerity. He was forced to admit that the dressing was really necessary because the taste was clearly lacking. Inspired by this idea, he threw a handkerchief on his head and stated that he would be able to invent something from everything in the cell. Afa agreed with that. He later prepared a new dish and put it on the table in front of the girl. She wondered if she could try an Asuta with her readiness. The Afa began to chew food only after swallowing. The protagonist just asked her thought. She smiled, slightly blushed, and noticed that it was not enough. It caused him delight, and he said that everything was clear now. The girl confidently stated that they would cope with this Kamua is from the first blow. Asuta again asked if they really intended to put it. It was decided that the next day they would go to Kim Yusa's history. The next day they came to the hotel. Kamva wondered if they brought in the bag the products that were about to sell in the store, and the main character confirmed it. The defender was glad and noted that why to delay, let them be covered more quickly on the table. Sweet apologized to him, adding that he is not very pleased to look at him now. Camo, joking, said that he was just stupid, and then eagerly asked to finally show food. The protagonist agreed, and got a box with a new dish. He put it on the table in front of the defender. He took the object to his hands, noted that he was still warm, and then carefully opened it. Smoke has still risen from that place. Kamvala asked if it was really the same Jibadesh Yadidin, but Asuta did not respond. The man in angry returned the dish to the main character, and noted that the meat was too red. It was wrapped in piton and generously wrapped in sauce from above. Asuta explained to this that the sauce was made from boiled tarapa, and for a pleasant texture he added tino and aturia. He and Kamva looked at. Then he assured that he would not understand until he tried, and bitten a piece of dish. Chewing the food, he felt the heartbeat, and the cheeks had a blush of amazing taste. Kamua tore a piece of dish and stretched it to his assistant Rita, suggested to try. The radio felt a slight excitement, but agreed with him. When he milked his last piece, his face was illuminated, and a blush played on his cheeks. He noted that the dish was extremely nice and the meat was soft, in the sauce, and really delicious. Asuta thanked them sincerely from the heart. Remembering criticism from the mouth of Ife, he decided to prepare a dish that resembled burger. He suddenly turned to him and asked how he called his dish. The protagonist first became confused by the unexpected question, and then strongly clenched his hand into his fist and replied that it was Giba burger. After that, he turned to the defender and asked his opinion as to whether he was renting a shop. The defender seemed to even exclaimed. He said that the owner of the story about the helm agreed to rent a mobile counter. Asura was surprised to ask if everything was really so easy. He wondered if prices could be set. Kimva agreed, noting that he was his own business. The man added that it is only necessary to want to share. Let him tell him, and then everything will work. He only assured that he understood, and sincerely thanked him from all his heart. The protagonist wondered that everyone who tasted his burger with Jiba liked the dish. But he was worried about whether they would buy this food if they find out that she is with Jib meat. Recalling that the main connoisseurs of this dish were If and Kamui Yesha, he decided that it was a really cause for concern. Asuta and Aif returned home. He sat on the bed, thinking thoughtfully into his own thoughts. The girl turned to him and noted that when they left the hotel, something was extremely disturbed. The protagonist noted that he thinks at what cost it is better to sell burgers from a giba. She whispered softly, asking what this price means. Asut told her that she was thinking of selling burgers from the jiba for 2 copper. That is, at the same price as in the Kimusan mantles. Emotionally confirming, AIFA. He noted that everything happens that way. He added that ingredients such as akagria, poiton, tino with therapy and jigo were mixed with a nap. The girl has more sadly confirmed that everything is. Asura, meanwhile, continued his opinion. If you make 20 products a day, the cost of each will be 65 cents. Before that, he noted, you still need to add the cost of renting and paying the loan for a place for 10 days. With a serious expression, he stated that it costs 20 copper combs. The cost of ingredients will not exceed 0.65 per one, so the profit from each product will be 1.35 AI. From these calculations, Ive has already begun to be noticeably nervous. She sat in front of him, put her hand to her face and asked what it means. Asuta explained that, according to his estimates, so that you do not stay at least 60 burgers from the Giba in 10 days. Aifa exhaled with relief, realizing that the calculations were finally completed. She reminded herself once again that in 10 days it was necessary to sell 60 burgers for 2 copper apiece. In her thoughts, she confessed that her head had already crashed. The girl rose and, swaying, moved forward. Asuta approached her and wondered if everything was fine, noting that she still had difficulties. She threw a cape on her shoulders and stated that she was the mistress of this house. She would do her business, and would allow him to think and act on his own. Asuta approached her and agreed with her. Noticing that the girl was going somewhere, he asked where she was going. She turned and replied that she was hunting. Then the main character thanked her for the help with the store. It was at this moment that he realized. From now on, he will no longer support A5, and he will have to do everything himself. Bring food, serve visitors, cook dishes, and calculate the cost. From these thoughts he became ill, and he bent from nausea. Seeing this, A and FA wondered what had happened to him. Asura replied that he had completely forgotten that she was a thinker. But the girl stopped him and noted that it sounds impolite. But before leaving, she told him that Ryu's family had found a person who was interested in his business with a shot, and wondered if he would like to listen to this proposal. The protagonist, without rising, remembered only the name of the RJ. After a while, she came to Ryu and reported that she had heard the truth. He was really going to open a store in a stone city. Seeing her, he thought that she was the right person. He answered in the affirmative and invited her to enter the house. Interested, she wondered which store he plans to open. Basuda returned to her and said that she would have to tell him what he should sell and how to cook it. The feeling of guilt was still enveloped in the soul of confusion and misunderstanding. He brought it to a table that laid out a variety of products. The girl, considering all this, wondered if it was all the ingredients for the dish. She called those she saw: Gib, Tarap, Arya, Tino, Poitan, and Jigo. He just started telling how to cook this dish. First of all, you need to marinate the Jigo. Then knead the dough for the presidency, fry everything, and only when the potan is fried, all the ingredients for Gibburger are laid on the plate. The protagonist went into the role of a cook, tying a handkerchief on his head, and announced that everyone will now learn how to cook tarap sauce. First, you need to put the tarap in boiling water, and as soon as the skin is separated, drain the water and top up with a little wine. Then add salt and herbs to taste. Fry everything with tarapo. As soon as the tarapa becomes smooth and slippery, it means that the sauce with the taraba is ready. Then he threw the cutlet up, and noted that the cutlet was then packed with a palm to such a condition that it was placed in one hand, and only then spread on a frying pan for frying. Vinus wondered in him, which means the word tamping, but he continued to teach the recipe. Next, cut the aburia and mud, and sprinkle with the toasted drinking on top. On this mixture is laid with a fried cutlet with shibi and watered with taro sauce. In the end, all this is covered with fried poitin on top, and here, Giba burger is ready. At the same time, he showed the girl what the end result should look like. Hearing this name, the Vane asked if the dish was really called Gaba burger. In response, the guy stretched her plate and suggested to taste. The girl agreed. At first, she broke a small piece, carefully chewed it, and then put the rest of the dish on the table. At first, she could not understand her own feelings. But in a moment, a smile appeared on her face, and the cheeks were blossomed. Venus noted that the local fountain is so lush, and the meat of Guba is the most desired value. The Masood suggested that probably the source became more full of adding chopped jigo, such as yams. He was glad that new reviews emerged. He turned to the wine and noted that all the necessary ingredients were already there. The dishes were also on hand. It was only necessary to find firewood for fire. Asura asked the girl to bring firewood. She did not seem to understand him, and only assured that, of course, she would fulfill her request. In her opinion, there should be no difficulty with firewood, but at the same time she did not even shift. It seemed to him that he had already forgotten how in this world his place could be called the fate of a beggar. Asut removed his handkerchief from his head, and deep sadness appeared in his gaze. Seeing his condition, Vin wondered what had happened to him. He assured that nothing special happened. The protagonist reported that 3 days later, he goes to a stone city where he intends to rent a shop. So he asked if she could come there in the morning. The evening has come. Afa returned from hunting. When she reached, she wondered if he had gone without complications. Suda sat, pressing his knees to his chest and leaning his back against the wall. He replied with noticeable excitement that yes, everything was fine. He thought that when talking, he completely forgot that he was not in Japan. Even for a moment, he did not think of stealing or getting involved in a senseless fight. The Afa noted that she would go hunting, and he will be in the store at this time. Together they will manage both things, she said, and said whether he agrees whether she supports her intention. He strongly assured in his agreement and added that there was FA and therefore capable of everything. 3 days later, he stood in front of the house, gathering everything he needed, and expected the root of the vein. There was no soul on the horizon, and he was pleased to appear as soon as possible. He was immediately called to the name, and Vinana reported that she had already arrived. Asuta was a little puzzled, but he smiled, assured that it was wonderful. A girl stood in front of him. Her hair was collected in the usual hairstyle, but her clothes changed. Now she had a long, cut dress with a deep cut. Asura wondered what clothes she dressed. She explained that when the proles go to the stone city, they try to close as tightly as possible to hide most of the body under the fabric. Asura wondered. Even though she wore, all her features remained expressive. Venus fought together and reminded it that she had already informed her intention to visit his shop, and another person expressed a desire to join them. At this point, a stranger appeared from the back. The protagonist, as soon as he saw him, was only able to exclaim. It turned out to be Rudo. Asuta wondered why he appeared here. In response, Rudo asked why Asuta was so surprised, because he came to accompany him on the way and protect him. Vina immediately joined the conversation, noting that he seemed to express his desire to go as soon as he learned about opening a store. The guy began to be indignant, justifying himself that he just had free time, so he decided to leave. Rudy Russ was embarrassed and when he gained his gaze, advised the girl to pay attention to the Asbut. If he is left alone, he can be attacked, because he is an exile, and many will certainly want to use it. The main character was stunned by such words. He sobbed and asked Rudd to help him with things. Rudo willingly agreed. Distributing the property among themselves, the assistants looked carefully at him and nodded. Asuta gladly reported that they were heading to a stone city. Both Viken and Rudo were determined. As always, their journey ran through the suspension bridge. Arriving in the city, the protagonist reported that they finally got. At the same time, his appearance testified he is about to faint from fatigue. His companion just looked at him with distrust. They wondered if everything was fine with him, and he assured that everything was fine. After that, he reported that they should now go to Kimis's history to rent a shop. When he approached the meeting place, he noticed it near the building. Asuta stunned its appearance. Rudo approached and noted that he brought her exactly where he needed. Looking at the main character, he wondered if something serious happened. He assured that everything is fine. Asuti already seemed to be dead, but was in an unfamiliar country. In memory, the image of his father and work together with him. He was unfortunate that even his father could not tell about it. The father has his own institution, and he will find himself in a tiny position that means nothing. Asvat rugged, in his look there was a determination. Smiling Rudo, he ordered to accelerate all the preparations and immediately start preparing for the opening. They walked the streets of the city, and the three of them robbed the store. The men stepped in front, and the girl behind the back distracted the attention of passers by directing all the views on themselves. Following the opening of the store among the forest, people immediately talked about what they were going to sell there and who stands for this business. Sutra felt acutely as he found himself at the center for general attention, one that he had never experienced before, and it pleased him. However, the protagonist pointed to them where to open the store. He noted that it would be bad if the very fact of opening the store would cause people to disgust. When they got to the place, it became clear that they were just on the edge of the shopping street. The assistants agreed with this thought, noting that they were too far away. Then Asuta suggested that they first split, and Rudo supported the idea. They put the ingredients in a prominent place. Together, determined, they looked around. The protagonist realized that he will remain here from now on to fulfill his purpose. Asuta took one of the bag and reported that he was going to put the products into its seats. Rudo wondered where to put firewood. In response, Asuta pointed out the place, adding that 5 or 6 logs should be put there. Venus wondered if you could also put Acadia there. The protagonist agreed with her and noted that there was worth bringing a cauldron here. The cutlets will lie here, and someone's box will be needed on the side. It will be possible to stand on it. They found a box on which Asuta sat. Everyone was happy. Asuta said it was wonderful and everything is ready. Then he turned to Vina and Ruto, thanking them sincerely from the heart. Both smiled at him, noting that there was nothing to thank. The protagonist looked around and thought that he was his shop, and then remembered. Of course, she really belonged to him. However, if it were not youth and other plies, he would have happened. He came to the conclusion that it was not just his shop, but no one was approached. Asuta was very upset. He approached Viana and asked if he could somehow invite people, but she replied that it was forbidden. They were preparing the dish when he heard that someone was crashing nearby. Turning to the sound, he saw a man passing. Asuta turned to the wreath, asking to put an acquaintance on the fountain. She agreed. The protagonist met with her husband. They were waiting from afar when he came closer, but the man suddenly turned away and passed quietly. The protagonist lingered on his look. After reaching the edge of the street, he turned back. Vin and Asuta were a little upset. However, to cheer them up, he assured that everything was fine, because they had just opened. The girl supported him. Then he asked Tom, where people who were here recently went here until they were preparing a shop. Near them, Rudo with his back to the wall and yawned tiredly. Watching this, the protagonist thought that the situation was not the best. Even the guard, it seemed, was about to fall asleep. He mentioned Isekai'D. If so goes on, they not only do not fulfill the daily plan of 10 burgers, but also risk spoiling their products. Asuta noted that this should be avoided, so he turned to Vinru and asked him to serve a cutlet. Immediately he added the necessary ingredients to it. An incredible aroma slowly began to rise from the pan. The assistant gladly noted that the smell is just wonderful. The fragrant waves have already come to those who stood nearby. They were interested in the fuss, and they came closer to their store. In the meantime, more and more people were going to see what he was cooking. As a result, one of the men realized that the cutlets were made of J meat and reported it to another. Hearing this news, people began to turn back, saying that they would abstain from buying. The protagonist engulfed the annoyance, and he clenched his fists. In the imagination, the faces of people who cast on him and, without stopping, were moving away from the store. It seemed to him that everything was finally cleared, and he wondered if he would not agree, after all. People from outside the forest to take Giba meat. He returned to reality, the voice of guilt, which he called on his name. Their shop was approaching several men in light clothing with head hoods. One of them, fair-haired, wondered if the dish was made from Java and asked one portion. He prepared one gib burger, saying that he was costing 2 copper, and reached out. Meanwhile, I thought, these men have dark skin, always hold together and wear suspicious raincoats. The stranger handed him 2 coins and took the burger. Asuta watched him with curiosity, expecting whether he would dare to taste the dish. Finally, the man bit the piece. The men continued to stand near the Asuta shop. The blonde stranger tasted the burger leisurely, and the protagonist watched it closely. Looking at them, he felt, it is unlikely, however, they became his first clients. The stranger, in the eyes of everyone, ate a burger to the last piece, and then returned to his comrades and began to speak something. After that, everyone began to whisper together. Asuta was surprised. He could not understand why they were reacting so much, and suddenly the same stranger stated that he wanted to buy 7 more products. The protagonist, as if not hearing these words, only looked at him with misunderstanding, not changing his face expression. The vein was agitated, and he stated that they wanted to buy 7 more products. Finally, it came to the real meaning of the situation, and he just took into account. In the meantime, I thought that men probably discussed a trial purchase. When they approached the store, he turned to them and reported that there were 14 copper to pay for everything. They handed him the coins, and in response he stretched them burgers. Taking things into their hands, they turned them into the same crowd. Asuta thanked them and invited them to come. The hangman smiled and reported that they had already sell 8 products. The protagonist again noted that they had already sold as many as 8 pieces, but suddenly he caught himself thinking that he never heard their impressions about the dish. Considering the coins he received, he mentally noted that 8 out of 10 sold, so today he will be able to fulfill the norm today. The time has passed. They were still standing for new visitors, but no one has appeared. Venus noted that she had already been noon. He agreed with that. However, for that moment, none of the buyers appeared. Asuta looked around. There were 2 burgers behind him. He thought about how it happens. Some 2 burgers are so close and so unattainable. Then he noticed how the boy approached him. Looking at him, he remembered who it was. Smiling, the boy reminded that he was a student of Kamayus. Asura noted that he was rarely seen without a manager. Tom replied that the defender was currently busy, so he came today for him. The protagonist thought that he did not come. He asked out loud for what reason the guest appeared. Reet suddenly became serious, although in his voice a slight confusion was felt. He apologized to what to inform them further. Kamua asked to convey that he had no opportunity to taste the burger prepared by Asuta, because things were not too successful. Then he just fell on the bed, although there was still a lot of work. Listening to this story, he vividly imagined as he could shed through this tear. The Rit pulled the coin out of the bag and wondered if they would sell a burger. The protagonist smiled and assured that they are undoubtedly ready to sell. He mentally noted that there was another. More lost, the student confessed that he wanted to try, so he ordered 2 burgers at once. Asuta, in response, decided that he was a real angel in the human likeness and promised to bring everything immediately. The guy thanked him sincerely. The protagonist believed that the first of the 10 days of his shop had passed successfully. Together with Vin and Ruto, they reached his home, where he thanked them for their help. In response, the girl advised to turn to her as needed. Asuta quietly opened the door of the house and announced his return. Afa sat on the floor. He called her by name. She turned and noted that he had somehow returned earlier. He asked again why, in her opinion, it was early. She explained that it was only a recently noon. Really, it was early. Aifa looked away and wondered whether he managed to sell a dozen of the burgers of Gaber. He replied to that, and he added, "With God's help." She turned to him sharply and wondered what he was in mind. Asuta was hesitated for a moment. After all, without the rescue intervention of Kamua, he could hardly be able to realize. His hand involuntarily squeezed into his fist. Suddenly he remembered and asked her whether those people in long white robes were always going together. "They are from some eastern country." The woman replied that they arrived from the eastern lands. She suggested that these people have grown into a group, probably for business purposes. Then, Elisa wondered that he was giving them. The man explained that they just bought him from a Buck's Burgers. He was upset and believed that he had purchased only a group of merchants. The girl smiled in response and noted that it was interesting. It was very surprised by Asuta. She explained that the Chinese have no prejudice about high biotin, but for them it is a real novelty. If they want to buy it, it indicates that it has brought good changes to people. IFA praised him, noting that he was doing well. Not hoping for such an assessment, the guy first froze and then chopped. He thanked her what the girl wondered in surprise for what he thanked. As he was ashamed, he quickly translated the conversation on another topic and suggested to prepare dinner. Turning, the guy sat down and went to cook, engaged in kitchen chores. The girl, watching him, smiled gently. The next day the weather was sharply spoiled. It was raining the wall outside. Vin Roos noted that when they arrived, the sun was still shining. Asura, having covered all the food, said that it is good that it was just a rain. He looked down to the sky and noted that in the rain, these sheep may not appear. The rain, meanwhile, did not subscribe. At that moment, Kemva jumped into the store and asked if, in their opinion, the RIT would appear here as yesterday. His words were forced to shudder at surprise. The protagonist replied that he did not consider it. The defender noted that he would then wait for him. And then he added that it also means no. Kamua coughed a little and asked him 3 burgers. Asuta wondered if he really introduced someone to Gibeathan, but Kamua denied. 2 burgers were for himself and 1 for the reef. The protagonist thought that he was really quite a child. However, he buys, and thank God. The man deducted him 6 copper, thanked and advised him to return, and then handed over 3 burgers. Kamva said goodbye to them, wished to try their best. The man hid the food under the cloak to keep it from the rain. He noted that he was in an extremely bad mood today, and the protagonist agreed without hesitation. Meanwhile, there was an adventure elsewhere. The rain is still tireless, pouring the roads and turning them into small rivers. In one of these street currents, the unconscious Ify lay in cold water. Vin and Asuta were still on the trading street. Looking up, he noted that the rain still has not subsided and there is no living soul on the street. The girl agreed with him. Having analyzed the situation, the protagonist decided that today is enough. It is time to close. In a hurry, he extinguished the fire on the stove. Vinus was surprised to ask if he was sure, because today they sold only 3 products. He calmly replied to it that he understood everything. He explained that this pad is mobile, so you should know when it is time to roll. Noticing that the owner began to put things up, Ruto wondered if they were already heading home. Asura was surprised to see the guest and asked if he had already been here. After that, he apologized that he would have to carry the burden back again. Ruto began to annoy and stated that the case is not in weight, but how dangerous it is for the mountain trails under the rain with it. He declined strongly. Sutra just smiled condescendingly, assured that he understands his position. In the end, they decided to move on. That man did not stop reminding the protagonist, so that he was tracking his feet and not flying into the air. The protagonist was surprised. He was ahead of everyone. Ruto added that it is this man who realizes what a single mistake could turn. He believed that it was much better than falling and staying. Asuta replied to this that he understands him and would make every effort. The young man only asked not to let them down. They walked together, overcoming bad weather and a difficult way. Suddenly, the main character jumped into a pit. He stopped to find out what happened. Looking just in front of himself, he noticed something unusual. His heart was crazy, and his eyes were wide open from surprise. He immediately turned to Rudo, inviting to approach closer. Asking what happened, he heard in response that someone seemed to have fallen here. The protagonist looked around and asked what they would do next. Rudo replied to this that he would go and look himself. The latter ordered them to stay in place and immediately walked down. Asuta expressed his hope that everything was fine. Vinus supported his opinion. Rudd, approaching the man lying on the ground, immediately recognized him. He called a sense in his name, ordered him to put things and leisurely move to him. The girl warned that he would be careful, for which Ruda thanked her. Going down the stairs, he thought that he could only be called for one reason. Noticing him, Ruto immediately called to come closer. However, when he was approaching, he saw that there was an Ife on the ground. Rudo Roos confirmed his worst fears, reporting that the girl is unconscious. Asura, full of anxiety for her, hurried to the girl, sharply grabbed her hand, raised her back and lifted up. Ruto tried to stop him, assuring that he would call people now. However, the main character denied. How can she be left here? Then I asked him to help him, because the point is one family, so he will take her home. Rutudo closely followed how the main character raised the girl, and then squeezed his hand and assured that he would help him. They began to climb up, and the guy was helping, pushing them in his back. He advised Asuti to keep her firmly. They slowly climbed the stairs. Seeing who they met, Vin was alert. Ruto advised her to go ahead. Subsequently, they reached the house of Fa. The two of them brought the IFU inside and carefully led it against the wall so that it did not fall. Asuta apologized to Rudo, acknowledging that he now has a debt to him. He assured that next time he would thank the unusual treat. When the girl was about to go, the branch took his hand, stopped, turned to the main character, and said that he took care of herself, and then said goodbye. Returning to the house, the bridegroom immediately burned the fire to make it warmer. He dropped his clothes so that he could dry and decided to leave it on the floor. The girl went to her room and quietly muttered something under her nose. He immediately turned to her by his name, asking how she feels. At first, she did not understand anything. She looked around and asked why she was at home. In response, Asura explained that he found her in the forest, probably after she had fallen under a heavy downpour. Then he wondered if she was not cold, and if she hurt something. AIFAA, she thought about the drain, and suddenly something like a stabbed. He immediately wondered if she did not hurt and heard that everything was fine. He was outraged that he was wonderful and advised to go to bed. The protagonist put her on the mattress and covered her so that she would not freeze. She confessed that she was difficult. He advised to suffer a little. Now he would bring her hot soup. While the soup was preparing, she continued to lie down. Returning slightly, the Aifa felt that her right shoulder was dislocated. She approached the soup bowl, touched the dish, and noted that the soup was already cold. She added that you needed to eat soup before going, and wondered if she could eat. The girl's cheeks were sharply overwhelmed. Then the bitch carefully wondered what happened. The girl asked him to feed her. The protagonist replied that he understood everything, but was surprised when she suddenly rose, leaning on her left hand, and opened her mouth a little, getting ready to take the soup. He scored a spoonful of soup and handed it. She was still embarrassed, ate the whole spoon entirely so as not to show inconvenience. Looking at her, Asuta suddenly realized that his thoughts did not go there. He began to drive away unnecessary ideas, trying to convince himself that he just cares for the girl. Having eaten the whole soup, the girl dropped on her knees. She turned to him and wondered if he could impose a painkiller on her right shoulder. At first he did not understand what she was talking about, and yet she quickly apologized and said she could take the medicine on her own. The protagonist only spent her look when she got up and went to the necessary. Returning, she reached out to him an unfamiliar substance, explaining that it was an anesthetic. He took the tool and briefly assured that he understood. Therefore, Asuta, trembling, began to carefully apply the ointment on her right shoulder. From his touches, the girl began to groan and quietly mutter something under her nose. When she started to suffocate, he wondered what was happening. Recognizing, he looked away, turned to her named, and noted that she had a fever. Something was wrong. She agreed with him and said she would go to bed. In response, he noted that she was doing the right thing. It was at that moment that she reached out to his back and pulled it tight to the edge of his t-shirt. As a result, he had to lie next to her on the same mattress, and the girl leaned against him as close as she could. He could no longer think about anything but the distance between their bodies. Isekai'D finally plunged into a dream, and even in her sleep she began to click her father. It surprised Asuta, but later he remembered that the girl was only 17, as much as he was. She was left without a father, and since then she lived alone, passing through a difficult period. The protagonist returned to her, closed his eyes, put his hand on her face, and began to assure that everything is well. The next day, Asuta began to go to the city again for trade. He wondered in the Ife whether she really wanted to accompany him, and she confirmed her decision, adding that the fever had subsided. In addition, she will not be able to hunt with such a hand. She noted that this is why she would go to the genome to protect him. He just smiled at these words and advised her not to worry too much. Ife and Asuta left home. Vegana's oar was already heading for them. The latter reported that the head of the FAA will go with them. The protagonist apologized for forcing them to go with him that day. Blondin only noted that there was nothing wrong with that. Rudo immediately turned to Elisa and asked if he could move on. She intervened in the conversation, noting that she had damaged her hand. Head FA, she bowed her head, apologizing for yesterday's troubles and thanking them for repeatedly carrying her home. She cannot hunt yet, and will now go with them to the Genos. Asuta looked at the girl and realized that the situation was still embarrassing her. The same, without stopping, she said, even with an injured hand, she will still be able to protect them from robbers, at least should try. The girl's words inspired the oar, and squeezing his fists, he said that in this case, they would go to the city and immediately reinforce. Viana expressed her opinion and joked whether Asha did not pay him separately. All together laughed. For a while they got the assigned place. Afa first saw this building and asked if it was his shop. He replied that yes it was. Then he turned to the wreath and asked for help because they just came. Asuta got products. The girl wondered about the meat, and he explained that he had left the stuffing at home in the rain. And yesterday, he never was able to prepare minced meat for cutlets. She replied that she understood everything. Then he turned to her and reported that he was finally going to cut the meat and asked her to do the kneading. She agreed. As always, he sat down near the wall, stretched, and stated that he would rest a little. Because local places are completely on the outskirts, people are infrequent. Random passers, by almost never look, and those who appear usually come in business. The Ina only nodded, making it clear that she understood everything. The girl wondered if buyers would still appear. Blondin answered her affirmative. Suddenly someone's steps came. Everyone immediately decided that it had come to a client. Then a man approached the store and, contacting Asuta, reported that no one had approached him. Afa instantly jumped from the counter, ready to stand up for it. The stranger began to be indignant, explaining that he sells their vegetables here only because Kamua advised them to eat. After that, he wondered what they turned these vegetables. Aifa, looking at the man with an indifferent look, wondered what had happened. In response, Root explained to her that it was a vegetable grower. Hearing this, Aifa moved to his direction, although Blondin tried to stop it. The girl came to the seller of vegetables and wondered if he had ever been a hamburger. If not, she advised him to try. The man replied to this. Asuta, watching everything from the side, felt the approach of something anxious. The man turned to Efe and turned to her, calling a little girl. Efe asked what he wanted from her. Suddenly, he smiled and said that he could finally thank her. So he expressed his sincere gratitude for his daughter's help. The head of the football association, amazed, asked him. She apologized to him, confessing that she did not understand what it was about. The vegetable seller closed his eyes and quietly added that he brought her with him today. He called his daughter to come. At the same time, a little girl with short black hair appeared before them. Looking at the girl, Afa narrowed her eyes and reported that she didn't remember her at all. At this point, Tara has summoned. She told how the head of FA. He drove a drunken friend when he accidentally hit her. He thought about Herd and came to the conclusion that it was really one of those accidents. Then she added that she was also reminded of something like that. Tara smiled hearing these words. Her father then suggested not using the hibliot, but let them try their burger, one for him, the other for the container. One of the groom looked at him and asked if he was really sure of it. On this, the merchant of vegetables said that he sees nothing surprise. He was interested in seeing what he would prepare from his vegetables. The protagonist appealed to the wreath of Ru to plant the shadow on top of the poitan. She assured that she understood him, and the man watched their actions closely and noted that they still mixed the mud, so she did not feel her true charm anymore. He further wondered that he was frying, because this dish did not resemble chicken. He watched the hero teaching her on the shadow, and could not understand what he really conceived. The protagonist stretched them 2 hamburgers, apologizing for the delay, and reporting that everything was ready. The seller of vegetables first looked at this dish, and then confirmed that the price would really be 6 copper. Tara, without waiting for her father, immediately bite a piece of burger. Her dad turned and looked at her daughter in surprise. Tara chewed with difficulties, and her cheeks were instantly scattered like dawn. Asvut was thought, was the chicken not too sharp? Tara approached Isekai'D, called it, and noted that the dish was delicious. In her look, she felt determination, so she was obvious. She really liked it. The vegetable, looking at this picture, thought of his shy daughter, who would behave the same. The Afa smiled her words and said she was pleased to hear it. The man was certain not to lose, so he also decided to bite the burger. He ate it to the end and wondered if it was really chicken. He approached Asuta and stated that the ground Tina was pleased. He was answered and also noted that the meat between the layers, like veal, is also quite suitable for food. The protagonist did not expect such perseverance and explained that it was ground chicken. The merchant of vegetables reflected on what he heard and asked, if Asuta already grinds meat, why not use other? Because the essence will not change it. He then clarified that he also sells chicken, which he received an affirmative answer from Asuta. He explained to the man that the burgers did not consider the giba bad at all. He would just want more people to know all the benefits of this type of meat. He thought he would be able to sell exclusively the hamburgers of the giba. But now he is in loss and understands that something needs to be changed. However, in the presence of Isekai'D, he does not dare to say this. The vegetable merchant smiled and informed that then he would show him everything that tasted well with giba, and asked how he treats his offer. The man was convinced that his daughter was looking at him, so he radiated joy and expected her attention. However, the girl stood her back. It was at that moment that Asuta thanked him for his proposal. The vegetable grower stated that he would go and bring everything he needed. Then he called his daughter, reporting that it was time to go home. The witch Tara agreed, returned to the characters with a gentle smile, and said goodbye to them. Asuta seemed that the face of a man shade a slight sadness. After a while, the man returned, bringing some vegetables from the house. The main character, along with Viana, leaned over the broth. The girl noted that many of these vegetables saw for the first time. Asura asked him if you could try those vegetables. In response, the merchant noted that they are not sold, so guests can safely taste. And it was at this moment that he remembered that he wanted to warn the main character, but he did not have time. He began to tell that there were vegetables with a very rich taste. It was at this point that Asuta just decided to try one of these vegetables. Tears shone in the eyes of the main character. He confessed that this thing, similar to a little turnip with a sharp smell and a special taste, pierced his nostrils through. He confessed that he did not understand anything, but for what he saw, he realized. His guess was correct. The vegetable seller looked at what remained from his goods and noted that this means nothing. Viana, turning to Asuta, noted that in that good sense. The man explained that there is an extremely strong odor and it is not necessary to use it fresh. Then he wondered if the guy would try some more vegetables. Asura dropped on his knees. Tears were still shining in his eyes, and the only thought remained a sharp smell of that vegetable dish. The man noted that he could now spit it. The protagonist refused, and then swallowed what he was offered, and stated that he could do something with it. Asuta turned to the vegetable merchant and stated that he wanted to talk about the mission. He agreed, and wondered if his vegetables ripened quickly. The man immediately asked how much he needed to sell. The protagonist showed how much to take, and explained it. Then the man called the exact amount and asked her to pay. The cheerful salesman of the vegetables turned and said he would go after fresh vegetables, so he asked to wait a little. Asuta remained only mentally note that the agreement was already concluded. Looking at the bags with other goods, The protagonist wondered how to do them. At that moment, Ifa suggested that this man was an artisan, and Basuda looked at her unbelievably. He wondered what he was a cook, and thanks to the advice of a specialist in vegetables, will be able to create a new menu. In his view, determination was red. He was approached by Vienna and asked what he was doing. In response, he noted that he was thinking about the new menu. Understanding the meaning of her words, the girl seriously wondered if he really intended to invent a new menu. He was embarrassed, but acknowledged that it was true. She smiled, embarrassed, and in a moment she said she was really interesting, and then wondered if she could help him. They looked into the box where the jug stood. Asuta smiled and noted that it was now time to collect products. There was a wine next to him, whose face was also a smile. He got a jug and noted that the dish was still meat, so the bad breath should be eliminated. Then Vivina asked how he plans to season the dish. He replied to this that he should first think and see what seasonings are available. He found salt for therapshos and pico leaves. Sweet believed that these ingredients were suitable for frying chicken. Then he thought about how to invent a way to sell meat separately. He was so absorbed by these reflections that Vinru was forced to lean towards him and call it. She wondered why he cut the meat with such thin slices. In response, the protagonist explained that it will be convenient to eat, and together with pico and salt, it will quickly become refined. At this point he was called. Asuta turned and saw that it had returned the salesman of the vegetables. This is exactly how he was used to call him, but the man denied. They say he has a name, and his name is his Dora. He put the vegetables in front of him, informed that he had brought Mama. The protagonist thanked for it, and he immediately took them to cut them. At this time, he asked for a little wine in ruin to ignite the stove. Asutana was passionate about the recipe. He put a frying pan on a fire, slightly watered it with wine, added the sliced yayama, and when everything was frying, he added wine again. The vegetable seller smiled happily, watching his dish carefully. Vinru noted that the smell is extremely appetizing. He then added thinly sliced meat to the dish. At that moment, both the girl and the man, catching the aroma, were barely straining. The appetite was disturbed because the smell of fried meat was mixed with a sharp taste of mee. All that fragrance around the city flew together, weaving a whole. Ruth Rutt wondered what he would like to eat, and the Ifa was surprised that she had no idea that such things were possible with the shop. Asuta turned to Dina and asked her to cook fried and tino. She promised to do everything he needed, and then wondered if the products would be enough. Asuta assured that this is enough. He thought that he could bring this dish with him. He laid the fried meat over the eaten and lightly watered the sauce. Venus smiled at him and asked if the meat was already ready. He turned to her and replied that everything was ready. He carefully twisted the dish into the roll and, joking, noted that he hoped the stuffing would not fall out. So the mnyamchik with the chicken was ready. Winryu and Dora leaned over the dish. The girl noted that she looks very appetizing. The seller of vegetables agreed, adding that as a supplier of miyama, he would have to taste it first. However, Asuta stopped him, asked to wait, and noted that it was only a trial version of the dish, so he was not yet sure whether he was ready to sell it. In response, the man stated that he has money and just wanted to eat. The protagonist noted that he did not hide his desires. He wrapped the dish for him and reported that you could buy for that money. The vegetable grower said that it costs 2 copper, paid and, turning away, immediately bitten a piece of food. Trying, he noted that the bitterness of Miyamoto, the feeling of chewing giba and salinity were what he lacked. However, he did not have time to complete his opinion. He suddenly felt someone's foreign presence. He turned and noted the merchants who watched him closely. Seeing them, Asuti seemed to be approaching the monkey. The protagonist wondered if they would order Gibburger again. In response, Blondin noted that he would like the meat cut into thin slices. After that, he lifted one finger, showing that he wanted to get only one mnyamchik. Asuta was surprised and noted that it would cost 2 copper. He mentally acknowledged that there was no way back. He immediately turned to Vienna Rue, calling for another dish. At this point, the Chinese were watching the whole course of cooking. The seller of vegetables, glancing these people, decided to say goodbye and leave. Explaining that he needed to run, he promised to go a little later to buy a container in a sat. Looking after him, Asuta thought he had just escaped. The protagonist prepared mnyamchik, gave it to them, and took 2 copper. The Chinese in turn tasted this dish. Subsequently, they became boring again, and Asuta noted that they were talking again. he became wondering what they would discuss this time. The fair-haired man asked the protagonist for 6 more mines and 6 gibburgers. For the latter, it was a surprise. He began to think that if you add Doris to this purchase, it would be a plus today. Asuta firmly assured that he understood everything, and asked them to wait a little. Everything would be ready soon. After that, he turned to Vinru, and at first sight she realized what she was waiting for. Aifa, watching what happened before her, barely smiled noticeably. Rudy Roo, also following this painting, wondered why he did not have the opportunity to take the test. Soon, Asuta completely completed the preparation of the order and put all the dishes on the table. He politely apologized to the simium for expectations and reported that Giba burgers and Miam Chiki were ready. The men took their order and, starting to eat just on the go, went away. The protagonist sighed lightly, mentally thanked God for the chicken finally sold. He returned to the wreath and said that Tara should still cook food. She only nodded, making it clear that she understands everything. Then Asud wondered whether the vegetable merchant would return at all. Then Rudo-Ru suggested that he could go and find out everything he needed, and instead, the Ian will remain. He swayed, rising, and sighed that it is simply impossible to stand this smell while sitting on guard. Asada apologized to him. Then the guy said he was going to go, but the main character called him in his name. Rudo wondered what happened. The young man was already going to move on the road further when he suddenly exclaimed that he would prepare for him a burger from Giba before his return. Rudy Rudd immediately smiled. His cheeks were bad, and he said it was good. The protagonist also smiled in response, having rejoiced with him mentally. Asuta noted that he would have to make even more gib birch. Afa apologized to him, but he just looked at her and said that it was not necessary to apologize, because they were helping him. He smiled, and noted that they still managed to sell the chicken. Without their help on their own, he would hardly cope. The protagonist was sincerely grateful to both the Parisians and the Genoese. Vinryu lowered her eyes and smiled, confessing that he was very grateful to him. He was surprised by these words, but she quickly translated the conversation and reported that she was going to cut the shadow. At this time, Rudo went in search of a vegetable garden. Walking the street, he remembered the words of Asuti that it should be prepared for his return. One of the turns was a small group of people. There were several men and a girl with long dark hair. One of the men pointed to the store. They say, "Here she is." Another confirmed his words. Rutan and Rutaru thought, why these people look at the costume shop and, most importantly, who they are at all. Rudrud heard a brunette that she was the same store. One of the men offered to go there. They went round the road and headed to the store. He looked around and realized that he had to follow them. At this point, Asuta reported that the burgers are ready, and it was time to cook Miyutakov. Vinru, noticing that people were heading for them, asked if they were not visitors. The brunette stood near the store and looked at them with open hostility. Seeing this, the girl looked away and thought that the annoying look of the stranger was already drunk. Rudy Roo has already got to the destination. He wondered where he came from this confidence and whether those people intend to harm their store. At the same time, he was preparing to get weapons. The brunette was angry and explained what was the matter. She caught a pleasant aroma and came. A tray stood near the trees. The man asked if the high biotin was really so bad. Both on the faces read a dissatisfied mood. Vinru smiled uncertainly to them. Asuta watched them focusedly and seriously, and Ruthru suggested that he go to vegetables. A black-haired man with a short haircut noted that they were walking without stopping until the end of the street. The second, with longer hair, turned to a girl named Yumi, noting that her intuition should not be relied on. Asuta silently watched their disputes. Men began to declare Yumi that it was her duty, and she should cope with it. She was surprised in surprise, and wondered in what sense it belongs to her. They pushed her to the store. A short haircut was advised to taste their food. The girl asked if she was sure to eat chicken, wondering whether it was something. On which the other man noted that she wanted to come here. Looking at them, Asut wondered why it was called a mockery. Of course, he understood that the Genoese did not have much respect for the Parisians. He did not think for a long time, but immediately turned to Yumi, noting that she should first taste their food before hesitant to complain about her. The guy's words were struck by the girl to the heart. Her girlfriends assured that even Asuta shares their opinion. The latter believed that the guy himself understands the wrongness of his actions. But he opened the store not to make fun of people. The man returned to the girl again and asked what decision she made. The stranger froze, looking intently into the pieces of meat fried in a frying pan. One of the present swallowed saliva, succumbing to a seductive aroma. Yumi asked him to give her one of the pieces he had just prepared. Asuta smiled and advised the girl to taste the chicken miam chick, but she only twisted, as if the thought of this dish was unpleasant to her. A man with short hair ordered her to prepare for the test. She did not say a word, only watching the protagonist roasted thinly sliced meat. He handed her a piece of chicken and said it would cost 2 copper. She stretched his coin, inadvertently thinking that she had to spend money on such a bad dish. The main character looked at her carefully and thought, if the smell attracts her so much, then it is worth trying. Probably the taste will also appeal. Asuta saw her bitten a piece of dish. He thought it was wonderful. Now she would try his culinary work. Her girlfriends were already eagerly asked about impressions. Yumi swallowed a piece and, without thinking, sharply turned to leave. The men immediately began to shout her without realizing what was happening. They wondered what happened, to which she replied that it was a little thing, and advised to go as soon as possible. In addition, she noted that she was already hearty, and wondered if they finished eating. The protagonist looked at the girl with surprise. He did not expect such. Yumi's friends laughed, assured that they would never eat it. One of them noticed that the girl was angry. Neither Asuta nor wine found words in response. He looked at him and quietly called his name. He stood extremely sad, as if a dark, heavy aura was hanging around him. The Afa also looked after him, and in her look read a silent question. Suddenly, Venus reported that Rudo and Dora had returned. Asura was immersed in his own thoughts, and first did not understand Venus's words, so he asked again. Successful men came to the store. Rudo smiled and noted that they had come. The seller of vegetables greeted his hand and smiled, wondered if Miyamek was already ready for the container. Masuda was smiled and reported that Miyamek was ready, but said the name of the dish with a short pause. Dora thanked him and then looked as if looking for answers. The main character, stretching the bowl, asked what happened. The vegetable merchant took her in his hands and, having looked seriously, noted that he now pronounces the word moom chick with noticeable difficulties. Asutu was surprised that it was so rich. He lowered his eyes and first did not find words to express his thoughts. However, he said later that he understood what was the matter. He just thought for a moment. Asuta strained his jaw and noted that he thinks how to cook this dish even better. The Afa watched him closely at him, and in her gaze, genuine anxiety was read. She understood why he had to go through. The merchant of vegetables looked at him in surprise and asked if he was really going to improve the chicken. He added that, in his opinion, it is so a very good product. Asuta thanked him. However, he assured that they still have miam, but today they are still closing. At this point, someone from the street asked what exactly was about. It turned out that it was Kemoish, who was rapidly approaching them. His face was red, and his forehead covered his sweat. Running, he asked the Asut to wait. The protagonist looked at the voice of a man and met his appearance quite soaked. The defender asked if he had time to buy something. Asuta statedly reported that the trading rows were already closed. However, Kamva disagreed with him and exclaimed that he had managed. Noticing who came to the store, Dora congratulated her husband. The defender also answered her greetings and added that it seems just time. He wanted to repeat his words but suddenly fell silent. He admired the impression of Mikam and asked in Asut that he was thinking about new things. He confirmed that he really came up with a new dish, but noted that they are already completing the cleaning. The face of the Camus appeared at the same time surprise and sadness. The merchant of vegetables approached him, stretched out a package, and said that if Camus wishes it, let him take everything. At the same time, the man explained that he had bought vegetables for his daughter. The defender looked with interest in a new dish and, confidently nodding, noted that Asuta did not use chicken in this recipe. Kamva has already been going to go, saying that he will return tomorrow and buy, and also punish Yum so that nothing is settled. Turning, he asked to postpone one thing for him. The main character asked, "Is he going to eat alone?" The defender stated that he would not eat alone. Before his eyes, the image of the Reta emerged, and he noted that he looked surprisingly gentle. Unusual dishes were not easily given. It was necessary to feel the taste more than once to understand their peculiarity, even if I tried to reproduce the original aroma as accurately. Asuta, with his gaze, assured that he understood everything. Winrus turned to him and wondered what really happened. He also returned to her and assured that nothing had happened, so you should just continue to clean. She agreed with him. Dora added that she would go to her daughter, Eri. Everyone said goodbye tomorrow. On the way home, Asuta smiled and thanked Ayaf, blame and Or for today. The latter only noted that there is nothing to thank. The girl wondered why the head of FA so sleepy. A and FA was surprised by the unexpected question. She confessed that she was feeling fatigue and apologized to everyone, though she added mentally, she could not admit that she could not fall asleep because of seductive scents around. The girl noted that the most important thing is health. She looked at him and remembered that Asuta would cook something in the evening. She became wondering how today's auction would be. The next day the store was opened again. The protagonist put a frying pan on the fire and announced that they were starting work. The sense of guilt of Rua responded with a light smile to these words. Therefore, Asuta put a box on the table. Afa and Rud were surprised to look at this subject, not realizing that they were in front of them. The guy who had never seen such a box before asked the girl, asking what it was. Ifa tried to answer, but she was interrupted by the main character, who opened the box with a triumph and announced that he was impregnated with her own sauce inside the chicken. Ruta wondered again about the same sauce, and the girl nodded. Just that is what it was, cooked on her special sauce. The chairman of the football association tried to talk about what Asuta was doing yesterday, but suddenly Dora, a merchant of vegetables, came to them and asked if they had already opened. The protagonist, hearing his voice, turned, smiled, and noted that he saw. Dora again brought his vegetables. The seller of vegetables noted that he has long considered himself their master, so he decided to personally bring an order. Asuta thanked him with her heart. Dora also reported that Tara was with him today. She noted that she was interested in seeing Miyama. The husband's daughter stood nearby and looked at them. The vegetable merchant noted that it seems that yesterday's miyamak was really tasted. Asuta was nice to hear such words. Dora added that she was about his daughter. Meanwhile, Yumi returned to the tent again. Watching all this, she wondered what was happening between these people. She looked at Dora and containers, thinking about how the savages from the Giba were cooked right here, and surprised that these Genoa was so enthusiastically perceived. The protagonist noticed that Yumi appeared again. He met her gaze and smiled at what the girl shuddered with surprise, felt that she was intentionally affected, and with fury moved to the store. She squeezed between Doroha and the container and returned to Asuta. The girl wondered if he was selling his food again, to which he answered that she was very happy to come. Yumi was immediately angry hearing these words. She immediately began to question what he meant, but here she was, immediately summoned. She lowered her gaze and saw a little girl who turned to her. Tara assured the girl that this food was not nonsense at all, and offered to look more closely. Yumi looked at the girl, then closed her eyes, crossed her hands on her chest, and said that she understood everything and was ready to stay with her. Asuta watched her carefully, but Brump intentionally ignored his gaze and turned away. Then he turned to them and ordered him to look at him. However, the main character poured the wine on a frying pan and then put a chicken already soaked in sauce. Everything hissed, filling the kitchen with appetizing sounds. Tara, looking into the meat, noted that yesterday in chicken there were tiny pieces of meal, and here they were not at all, although from Scovaroda it still pulls the fried moi. She looked at it with surprise, believing that everything really is. However, the smell remained the same as yesterday. She did not rest her how it could have been. Asuta replied to the girl that he cut the meat yesterday, mixed it with the wine sauce, and left to marinate overnight. Taking the box, he showed everyone ready, marinated pieces. Tara smiled in his words and explained that the dish would smell so delicious because he left her to stand at night. Yumi only folded her hands on her chest and remained silent. He continued to talk about the cooking process. He said that now they add the sauce in which they cook, stew all together, so the meat absorbs the taste. Now the dish is ready. The girl looked at him with delight and smiled widely. Dora again approached the store, saying that he finally found useful use of his Miami. Then he returned to his daughter and wondered if she would agree to be with him. And the girl was glad to get on his proposal. Yumi, watching them, was quite surprised. Masuto strongly turned to her and asked if she wanted to taste his dish again. She immediately exclaimed, asking why she was chosen. He replied to this that he had nothing to sell anything. He just wanted her to taste the dish. Yumi tried to understand what the protagonist thought when he reached for her food in this situation. She was certain that today everything would be the same as yesterday. So she reached out and asked for a chick with a chick. The man replied that he understood it and carefully took the prepared dish. He stretched her plate, and she firmly took her into her hands. Without hesitation, Yumi immediately bitten a piece and, without looked, cheered the food silently. Asuta, watching her, thought only that she did not stop and eat. He looked at the girl with silent hope, and after all took her eyes, and then she bite again. The protagonist was sincerely pleased with this circumstance. He wondered what she was treating now, and remembered the reason why she remained without dinner the day before. Yumi milked the dish to the end. She waving her hand, she closed her eyes and reported she had completed. Asuta immediately asked her impression of the dish. She crossed her hands again on her chest and, with her gaze, said that it could be eaten. The shadows of feelings did not flash on her face. She said that for this reason, she wanted to pay him, and put 2 copper on the counter. However, he refused, explaining that he only asked her to try and tried to turn the coins back. Her cheeks were instantly spreading. She began to explain with excitement that she wanted to apologize in this way for those words when she called his chatter inappropriate for all. Looking at her, he suspected that, in her opinion, he was mocking people. She hurriedly explained what she paid, and then said goodbye and fled quickly. Asuto closed his eyes and bowed low to a sign of gratitude, but the girl had already disappeared. She never turned to him. He smiled, mentally noting that he was his first client in this city, which he did not know personally. Seeing his smile, he wondered what was the reason, but he only answered that nothing much had happened. She noted that she was still amazed at how Yumi managed to handle the meat in just 1 day, which was caused yesterday at once. Tara answered her, explaining that the reason was that the meat became even more delicious. Vinru was surprised by these words and even sighed in surprise. The girl noted that this time the chicken has a much more prominent taste. It is more saturated than yesterday. She even admitted that she would only like to taste the meat inside. Her father immediately leaned to her and smiled that yesterday Tara also said, "His shadow is a good young man." Hearing this, the girl was protected, inadvertently thinking that, after all, the residents of the city, their special preferences. Then Kim wedged him by name, saying that he had come to make several purchases. The main character looked at him indifferently. When he approached the store, he bowed low and thanked him for yesterday. Kemva was surprised and asked what was being about, but he just smiled widely and assured that he did not say anything. The protagonist wondered that he had only heard praise to his address. They often discussed the impressions of the dishes, although these grades could not always be fully relied on. It was at this moment that Dora said Kumuva that this day Astuti was even better than usual. He thought continuously that he had his own shop for the first time in his life. He was helped by different people. Others came to taste the dishes he prepared. All this turned so rapidly that now he did not know if he did not dream of it. At that moment, Vinru reported that the Chinese had already come. Kamoa just paid with him for lunch. The vegetable gate together with their daughter. They were going home. Camo joined them, noting the road that he had purchased a lot this day. It's time to take up work. Asuta smiled at the simians who came up and asked what he wanted. In response, they explained that they came to talk this day. The protagonist was genuinely surprised. Listening to one of the singers, he tightened significantly and began to get nervous. Aifa looked at them, trying to understand what was happening. Everything looked not at all as usual. After the conversation, the men dispersed, and Asura went to the head of FA. She called him in name. He approached her and said he had to talk to her.